Chapter 41. That magnificent beard. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Ever since his arrival in Medalla, Corco had been on constant edge. Powered by his self-hypnotic levels of confidence, he had done his best to paper over the cracks, but the ever-increasing pile of bad news had nibbled away at his composure. After the night on Mount Urkina, he had found his missing balance once again, at least for the moment. At last he could focus his mind and plan ahead as they left the mountains and went south, towards the capital at a steady pace. Even though their attempts to win over the estates along the way had remained unsuccessful, he could handle the predictable rejections much better than before. After all, any time he blew up in some brat's face, it would only hurt his reputation. Plus, the prince was far too caught up in his newest endeavor. For the first time since he had left Arcavia, Corco had restarted his teaching career. But would our firm beliefs in the values of our ancestors not bind us together better than anything? Primus asked. That's a nice thought, but your thinking is too shallow, young Padawan. With a raised finger, Corco reprimanded his new student. Ideology is the fastest way to unite a people, but you don't consider the flip side of ideological thought. If you believe in something without question, you will be controlled by those who control the belief. Even worse, most ideologies are subjective and open to interpretation. Who interprets the truth? That's not a question any human should be allowed to answer. Throughout their journey, the prince had spent his spare time to tutor Primus on some of the finer points of economics, trade and ethics, at least as far as he himself understood them. In the capital there would be conflict everywhere. Corco needed someone who could contradict, and thereby offend, people of high status. If he were to do all the offending himself, he would only make enemies. Meanwhile, his warrior attendants would risk their heads if they ever contradicted a noble in public. As luck would have it, Primus was a high-ranked noble himself and could offend anyone he wanted, at least so long as he stayed within the limits of common etiquette. Prince Corco, I understand your concern, but we should still keep to our traditions. We should honor the ancients and keep to their wisdom which has served us for so many generations. On the flip side, the old-fashioned upbringing Primus had received proved a constant hindrance. Quite often, the young master was unwilling to even consider views which were different from the nonsense his elders had taught him. The ancients, is it? Who do you mean by that? The half of our ancestors who came from Arcavia. Like those merchants who have come for our silver. Or the other who came from Chutwa. Bookworms who nag everyone into compliance if they dare have a different opinion from them. Despite being subject to another one of Corco's rants, Primus still kept still and listened in earnest. Our traditions are already corrupted by both sides, the East and the West. With the way things are going, you won't get the choice to simply stick to our tradition anymore. I've been to Arcavia and I can tell you that it's not that impressive. No, what we need is not someone else's tradition, we need to make our own from scratch, one that is unique to us, not derived from the East or the West. That would be a tradition worth defending. But how could we do that, Prince Corco? We cannot simply invent tradition, can we? Why not? If our new ideas are superior, why wouldn't they replace the old ones? In response to Corco's bold statement, Primus fell silent. Content with the current result of his lessons, the teacher decided to let his student deliberate by himself for a while. Instead, Corco looked ahead, towards the goal of their journey. After days of travel, they had finally come close to Arguna, the Silver City, and the armies which surrounded it. Since in Medalla, political weight had always been equated with military force, all estates had sent their own personal warriors to make their weight felt. A tense atmosphere had engulfed the city, like the calm before the storm. To make sure the capital itself wouldn't suffer in the impending chaos, warriors had been barred from entry into Arguna. As a consequence, temporary camps had sprung up all around the city to house troops from the various factions. 2 days ago, just as they had left the mountain pass, a runner of House Petrosilius had reached the caravan and informed them of the position of his family's camp, which was where they had been headed ever since. Although they were so close to their goal already, of course something would go wrong again. With clear intent to obstruct their path, a group of armed men swaggered onto the road. One of them made a large step forward to announce his leadership of the group and said, "Your game is up, foreign bandits. How dare you trample on these lands and try to rob its riches?" It all seemed so familiar. Reminded of the nonsense arrest they had gone through in Porcero, Corco and Fidelio shared a smirk as they suppressed their laughter. All the while the henchmen ignored the peculiar atmosphere and kept going. "As a servant of the great Prince Pluritac, my word shall stand for justice. Thus, you shall have a chance to prove your identity." "Yeah, I get it. So you wanna fight then? That's fine, let's fight." Unwilling to waste any more time on the minions, Corco waved off the grandiose speech. Ha! Since Corco had skipped the predictable steps of, "I am a noble, prove it, here's the proof, this proof is fake, no it's not, and let's solve this by combat," the henchman had been left utterly confused. "You're here to test the strength of my men, right? That's why you're provoking a stargazing brawl." Whenever there was a disagreement between two nobles of Medalla, one of them could challenge a stargazing brawl, a traditional method to settle disputes without the need for an all-out war. Under the watch of the stars, either the individual lords in question or 100-man groups of their warriors would fight one another, in combat deadly or otherwise. In most cases, the loser of the brawl would back down from his claim or ostracized by the other Medallan estates. "So, are we fighting right here?" Corco continued. "Weapons or fists? Oh, and please do tell which one of my good brothers would throw away warriors like this just to gain some intel." As far as Corco was concerned, the entire ploy was far too transparent. The warriors were here to scout out the strength of Corco's 100-man party by exploiting the old Medallan rules. It was exactly the kind of behavior which annoyed Corco more than anything. However, they couldn't just ignore a hostile troop, for fear of getting into a proper fight, without rules. Unless he wanted an unpredictable mess of a fight, the prince would have to play along. Since a brawl couldn't be avoided either way, he decided to let Dedric's men crush the nuisance and use the power of his men as a deterrent. To him, it seemed like the best remaining option, although he would have preferred to hide his strength for a while longer. As luck would have it, someone stepped in, just in time to fulfill his wishes. "Stop. I can vouch for this group." Atop the crest of a nearby hill, a group of warriors appeared while Corco had been busy. At the front of the warriors stood the man who had barged into the conversation. Tall and with a magnificent black beard that covered half his face, it was a figure the first prince was more than familiar with. Never had Corco been so glad to see facial hair. "Uncle. Corco my boy." Sanko Kaak Sakartu, the lord of the powerful southern Sakartu estate and governor of the south, greeted his nephew with his signature smile and a warm embrace, in complete breach of etiquette. "Welcome home, child. I am glad you are back." "Thank you. It was quite the journey," said Corco with a dumb grin on his face. "I am glad to see you fine, my boy, but what on earth happened to your hair?" Sanko replied as his smile transitioned into a worried frown. "Ah, it's not what you think. I'm just blending in." The prince tousled his hair. "Those Easterners are pretty hostile if you don't look like them, dress like them and think like them. Though I guess we aren't much different." Just like all insular, locally dominant cultures, the Yaku had a strong isolationist streak, especially since the last invasion attempts from the mainland had united the country a century ago. The only reason they were somewhat receptive to foreign ideas was their relative weakness compared to the great powers of the East, West and North. "The Easterners I have met these years were quite civil," Sanko replied. "Of course they were. After all, they don't have the numerical advantage here. They can be very helpful to us as long as we don't give them a foothold anywhere." "How is the brat? Any trouble?" Despite how rude he sounded, Sanko's face betrayed his worry. "You'll be surprised when you meet that son of yours again. Atao has properly grown up and leads the greatest fleet on the east coast. Though beard.wise, he's still got nothing on you. Like a drunk at a fancy dinner party, a disharmonious voice disrupted the family reunion. Although Lord Sakarta's opinion is respected, the identity of this person is to be questioned. It not something Lord can determine by himself. This servant is under strict. That's quite enough, Sanko barely raised his voice. His face didn't show so much as a hint of anger, but the disturbance still quieted down straight away. Beyond this hill sits an entire camp's worth of warriors, ready to challenge your authority here. You are free to try your luck with them. Unfortunately, this lord does not have the leisure to listen to the words of a bloodhound. Once the baffled minion had been finished off, Sanko turned back to his nephew. We should continue this in the camp. As they left behind the helpless loudmouth, Korko asked, so whose henchmen are these guys anyways? They wouldn't tell me. How Sicilia? Which makes them your youngest brother's followers. Hakakutek, was it? That's a fancy name to take for himself. At age 16, Medalla nobles would hold their maturity rites and give themselves their own names in the process. Beforehand, they would simply carry their father's name and the sequence of their birth, which made every primus their family's firstborn and young master primus to his side most definitely a kid. Yes, I thought it was quite presumptuous of him to take a hero's name, but what do I know? He deserves it if he actually manages to usurp the throne as the third-born son. Not to mention, the brat has grown into quite the monster. At 17, he is already as tall as his father was and a fierce warrior to boot. Korko wanted to wait for a quieter place for this sort of conversation, so he looked around for a change in subject. Luckily, he found one not too far from himself. By the way, uncle, meet Primus Vitus Petrosilius. He is about to take his maturity rites, so his grandfather sent him along to gain some experience. Elder Petrosilius has been very helpful. Young Master Primus Vitus Petrosilius greets Lord Sakartu. No need to be so stiff, my boy. We have already received message from your family's runners. Why else would I be here, outside of your family's camp? I have become well acquainted with your father over the past days. I am sure he will be ecstatic to meet you, Sanko said with a kind, open smile. This youngster thanks Lord Sakartu, Primus answered, stiff as a board. Don't mind it, uncle. The stiffness runs in the family. Korko chimed in while he thought back to the kid's grandfather. It would make sense, wouldn't it? Amongst lords, this campsite has been called the traditionalists. They're all old-fashioned people who mostly just care about the rules. No offense, my boy, Sanko said towards Primus, who quickly waved off the apology. Anyways, our Sashi camp is in the south. If you can firmly win over the traditionalists, our position would already be fairly stable. Don't worry, uncle, if there's one thing I'm good at, it's campaigning. For a second, Primus looked as if he wanted to interject, but Korko's stern gaze stopped him right in his tracks. So you have already started to prepare for the succession. Do not underestimate your brothers, it will be a difficult fight, Sanko said. Yeah. First we'll need support from the ancestral hall. If I can't even get nominated as emperor, there's no point to any of this. That shouldn't be a problem though, what with me being the crown prince and all. Although Korko's words were another proof of his flawless logic, his uncle to the side had gone silent all of a sudden. Mouth agape, he stared back at his uncle whose uncomfortable stare was focused ahead. What? Don't tell me they would make trouble for me. Why? Because they have declared you dead. You will have to stand answer to the ancestral hall and convince them to revert the initial declaration. A dead man can't inherit the throne, after all, Sanko answered. How difficult could that possibly be? Korko asked, while his hands flailed around to prove his exacerbation. I mean, I'm here, aren't I? Clearly not dead. None of those dusty old bone bags would ever admit to being wrong, Sanko sneered. They've decided that you're dead, so they're going to stick with that decision, even if you stand right before them. They would rather call you a fraud than fess up. Not to mention, most of the ancestors are northerners as well. They would rather see one of your brothers on the throne. Korko lowered his head, deep in thought. Just before the group reached the crest of the hill, he had formed his new strategy. We can't do anything against the north-south bias, but at least there's an easy way around the pride of the elders. We'll need some time though. It's best if we leave the ancestral hall for later. So what's the solution? Primus asked. Easy, Korko beamed back, full of confidence. We just need a scapegoat, some pawn who can take the blame for the wrong decision of the hall. I've heard that one of my old warriors came back earlier. It appears as if a warrior by the name of Quirinu pronounced your death after he returned from Arcavia, aboard a merchant's vessel. That man should have been one of yours, correct? Sanko asked. Oh, I'm so glad my old servant made it back in one piece, Korko replied with a dark smile. I sure hope we can meet back up for a nice chat. While the prince wallowed in his thoughts of revenge, Sanko tried to focus his nephew's mind back on the essentials. I understand that you would want to punish your servant, boy. In fact, I'll be happy to help you in that endeavor. Still, first we will have to find your man. Until then, we will have to avoid all contact with the ancestral hall. As Sanko's head crested over the hill, he squinted his eyes in the sunlight. Still, the old man remained as focused as always. Wait, Korko asked back. What about grandfather? Caelestis, I mean. With a snort, Sanko made his thoughts about the prince's grandfather more than clear. The noble elder Caelestis has been far too active for a member of the ancestral hall. He's run around outside like an emperor. I hear he's even held court to ratify laws. If you know what's good for you, don't count on that man's support. Uncle. Korko's stern voice calmed Sanko's rant before it could get started. I understand that you think the imperial family failed you, that they took your sister. But that was my mother as well. Grandfather had nothing to do with the poisoning. Grandfather is family, more than most. Even after Mom died, he was the only one who stood behind me, more than my father ever did. In the entire palace, he's the only ally I can rely on. With a sigh, Sanko brushed through his hair. I'm sorry, boy. I am. Either way, the elder isn't in the capital at the moment, so you won't be able to meet right away. So until then we'll stay away from the ancestors and focus on the estates. Banquets, deals, the usual. So long as we can muster up a majority support from the noble houses, even the ancestors would have to consider their options. After Korko had gotten used to the light, he could see the view before him at last. In the distance, hugged along the Argu River and huddled behind its imposing city walls, sprawled the Silver City, Arguna itself. By now Korko had some context and knew that for the standards of the time, Arguna was massive, far larger than any city he had seen on Arcavia. In fact, even the giant, slanted walls were not enough to contain the masses, and so the poorest of the poor had spilled out and formed an unofficial extension to the city all around it. Although the slums around the walls were the ones from Korko's memories, the camps which surrounded Arguna on all sides were not. Right below the hill they stood upon, a large camp had been erected from wooden stakes, as tents of all sizes, and even some wooden huts, had sprung up to house the companies of warriors. Why's everyone here anyways? Shouldn't the warriors stay inside? Although Korko had heard of the camps before, he had believed that they were simple fortifications, used to show some muscle as a diplomatic measure. Instead, it appeared as if the estates were preparing for war. This can't be right, can it? What's with this level of security? There's a fucking tower over there. Korko pointed at the wooden guard tower he had spotted in the direction of Arguna. Since the ancestors banned warriors from entering the city, everyone has been nervous. Things haven't gotten better since you came back home. Right now, the entire capital is like a bowstring, taut beyond its capacity. Great. And I'm walking right into it. Korko ruffled his hair in annoyance. Gonna enjoy this like the plague. All of a sudden, Sanko stormed ahead to stand in Korko's way. With furrowed brows, he stared into his nephew's eyes. What do you mean, boy? We only just met again and you already try to run. The palace is not how you remember. I don't think it is safe. Many of the lords don't even stay in their inner city mansions for fear of assassination. So then it is how I remember. With a confident grin, Korko shoved Sanko out of the way and continued on towards the walls, where a large congregation of nobles in expensive cloth was waiting for them. There is no need to rush things, is there? You could at least stay in the camp for one night and then make your entry in a proper manner tomorrow. If I did that it would only bring more trouble. I can hear the voices already. No proper pluritak would sleep out in the wild like a common dog. He is not worthy of the crown. I'd rather avoid the bullshit and not give ammunition to the hypocrites. Not to mention, if anything happens to me in the palace, the ones in charge of the place will ruin their reputation. No one would be this stupid when there's more than 2 competitors for the crown. So I'd appreciate it if you could lend me your palanquin for my entry. It's time to get home. Although Sanko remained quiet, Korko knew that although his uncle would be in a bad mood, the old lord would still play along. Even so, for once the prince chose silence as well. There wasn't any reason to chance his luck after all. Father. Primus' happy call drove through the brooding mood to dispel the clouds. By now they could all see the men who waited for them in more detail, and the young master had spotted someone he cared about. Enthused by the image of his father, he rushed ahead, to the traditionalist lords ready to greet the crown prince. Without a word, Korko and Sanko shared a look and slowed their steps. By the time they arrived in front of the camp, Primus had already become part of the group of lords. No fewer than 8 men, ranging from baby-faced youths to gray-haired elders stood at attention as they observed Korko and his party with great interest. Primus, the young master of House Petrosilius, stood at the front of the crowd, next to a middle-aged man with a hook nose and a full head of long, black hair. Even without any introduction, Korko could have guessed the man's name, as well as his political position. Everything about Lord Petrosilius, from his stern look and stiff demeanor to his old-fashioned clothing spoke of a man who lived his life 100 years in the past. Korko now began to regret that he had taught some modern ideas to this man's son. He just hoped it wouldn't cause trouble between them in the future. For now, however, there were more important matters to discuss. Primus once again moved towards his travel companion and teacher, always half a step behind his father. At this point Korko took a deep breath, to prepare for an excruciating round of introductions. He would be proven right. Crown Prince, please meet my father, Lord of the Samuska estate and Patriarch of House Petrosilius, Vitus Horatius Petrosilius. Without a single look at the son he hadn't seen in months, the tall man nodded his head and stepped ahead once more. His back unbent, the lord eyed Korko with an expressionless face. Only in his eyes, light danced to prove the lord's alert nature. Without breaking eye contact, the lord hinted at the slightest of bows. Lord Vitus Horatius Petrosilius welcomes Crown Prince to his camp. Crown Prince Korkapeka Tita Pluritak is indebted as a guest of House Petrosilius, Korko replied, careful to bow no deeper than his counterpart. Although the prince would have loved to get things over with soon, the greetings were far from done. Prince Korkapeka, please let me introduce, from the Tsakra region of eastern Medalla, Manus Calvus Curius, Lord of Tsakra. It is my, Calvus Curius, great honor to finally meet the Crown Prince of Medalla. Please let a small offer of gratitude be a commemoration of this momentous occasion. As the Crown Prince's attendant, Fidelio accepted the silver trinket without a word. Meanwhile, Korko returned another stiff, formal greeting, the kind Medallan nobles loved so much, the kind he despised like nothing else in the world. As he suppressed a sigh, the prince glanced behind Lord Tsakra, at the expectant collection of lords. This time, a small sigh defied his best efforts and escaped his lips. This one might take a while. Chapter 42 Little Bro, Let's Drink. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Arguna, the Silver City. The name was as fitting as it was obvious, as it had been built within the Arga Basin and along the Arga River. The city also offered close watch and direct control over the numerous, abundant mines in the area, none more important than the precious silver ore. Though the region had been mined for centuries, the basin showed no signs of exhaustion. That wealth was what had made Arguna the center of Metala's power and House Pluritak the most powerful house of the Twin Isles. Impatient for his arrival, Korko lifted the curtains of his uncle's palanquin, now painted with the triquetra of his own house. First he saw the handful of warriors he had brought for protection. Back at the traditionalist camp, the prince had left Dedrick behind to look after the rest of his men and to make sure the uncultured mercenary wouldn't create trouble at the court. For now, Primus would also stay with his father as well. Due to the ban of troops within Arguna, even the lord's own attendants were limited to 2 bearers for the palanquin and an additional 4 for security and advice. In truth, the flimsy safety net made Korko uneasy. Really, he should have been used to it. Since he had spent the last few years on Arcavia with a knife under his pillow, he had plenty of experience with assassinations. However, his knowledge of how dirty people could play to reach their goals only made things worse. It didn't help that at this moment, they were moving into Metala's heart of political intrigue. After they had passed through the enormous inner city walls, they entered the city's inner ring, the spacious nobles' quarters. One step through the enormous stone walls revealed a world far removed from the outside. While the rest of the city with all of its hustle was a loud, chaotic mess, within the walls one would find an almost eerie calm and cleanliness, as if the apocalypse had happened right after spring cleaning. While the houses outside the walls were built at least partially from stone, many constructions within the city walls were made from wood alone, not only reflecting the influence Chetwa culture had gained among Metala's nobility. Rather, the need to keep the foundries of the city running also meant that any forests within the vicinity had been destroyed long ago. As such, the ability to build a house from wood had become a sign of wealth. As if that hadn't been enough for the vain lords, the outer walls of the various mansions were lavishly decorated with carvings, paintings and even silver plating. With how simple and rustic everything away from the main roads looked, one had to look very hard to justify the name, Silver City, outside the walls. In here however, the abundance of decadence on show explained the eagerness of the foreign powers who tried to control his brothers. Many of the estates spent a good portion of their yearly income only on the literal and figurative facade of their Arguna mansions, even at the expense of their actual family estate back home, just to show their neighbors that they themselves mattered. The only indication that this place was, in fact, not some otherworldly realm of purity and splendor was the giant pillar of smoke in the west, where inside the walls, the weapons and armors of the imperial forces would be fashioned. However, the smoke remained the only indication of their existence as the view on the buildings themselves was blocked by the royal complex, an enormous palace with countless structures, towering above the city in all of its oppressive might. And the most remarkable ones among its buildings were the 2 imposing structures which threw long shadows over the entire inner city as they were backed by the evening sun peeking out from beneath the low hanging clouds. First was the monumental, rounded ziggurat which was the only pure stone structure of the complex and much older than even the city itself, the Moonlight Ziggurat. Not only was the pyramid ancient, it had been the center of the empire's political and religious power ever since the founding days. It housed the royal temple, royal tomb, the ancestral hall and of course, the grand court, where Korko's father had made all important decisions of the empire up until his death. The party's goal, however, wasn't the Moonlight Ziggurat, it was the other massive building. A gigantic fortress built from black stone and bright red wood, positioned next to the Arga River, uninviting and imposing from the outside. Korko however remembered the inside as pleasant and luxurious. No wonder, since the structure was the chosen home of the imperial family, his nominal home. There, Korko would find his accommodations for the night, but first they would have to make it past the palace gates. Considering their track record so far, he was surprised no underlings had tried to stop them at the inner city wall, so he just hoped their luck would last as his men, taken aback by the marvelous sights on their path, made their way up Yaku Hill, the root of the world. As they neared the giant double gate, the sound of gongs filled the air. The startled carriers stopped still and almost dropped the palanquin with Korko inside. "It's fine," the prince calmed them with a smooth voice, "it's just a greeting. Keep going." The gongs would always make the return of an imperial family member. In truth, Korko was surprised by the warm reception. Nonetheless content with the treatment, he stepped out of the palanquin to make the final part of his journey on foot. With Korko still several steps away from the base of the entrance, the giant doors began to swing outward. By the time the small group had reached the top of the stairs, the palace gate was opened wide enough for an army to enter, and their welcoming committee had appeared in its middle. The sight was underwhelming. "Prince Korko, welcome back." Chowpik di Pluritak, Prime Minister of Medalla for 40 years, looked exactly how Korko remembered him. The same small stature, the same sharp facial features and the same stiff smile, trained to immovability by a lifetime of political intrigue. Prince Korkapeka Titu Primu Pluritak has returned. Since Chowpik hadn't called Korko Crown Prince or even used a proper greeting, Korko decided to hit back in the most subtle way he could muster. The inclusion of his childhood name, Primu, made the line of succession clear. Whether the old minister liked it or not, Korko was the eldest prince. While Chowpik was still busy playing statue, Korko taunted the size of his welcome. "So where is everybody? Did bedtime come early? Tough day today." Prince Korko jests, the minister said, his smile unchanged. "Empress Mother Achilia is in the harem. At this late hour, she cannot exit unless she wishes to appear unseemly. Meanwhile, Prince Pakakutek has accompanied Elder Kalestis on a visit to Lord Achillea's lands. They aim to procure food for the warriors camped outside the walls. Prince Amautu, on the other hand, could not be found on such short notice and must have gone to bed by now. It is unfortunate, but Prince Korko's runner sent us the message belatedly. As such, we could not prepare an adequate greeting. This servant apologizes from the bottom of his heart." As he did his best to ignore the slimy act of the old politician, Korko looked at his grand welcome again. One old minister and a handful of servants stood to greet the dead emperor's eldest son. Since they were barely bothering to keep up a facade of minimum politeness, Korko wouldn't be bothered with etiquette either. "Whatever. Is there any other steps or is this it, Oldtimer?" This old man wonders if Prince would need to visit his father. The old man smiled. "Please kindly fuck off," Korko smiled right back. "I just came home, I'm not properly prepared and I'm dirty. What kind of trap are you trying to lead me into exactly?" Although he remained calm on the outside, Korko was fuming at the old man's brazen ploy. Worshipping his dead father now would have been a massive breach in form, which would have looked terrible in front of the other lords. However, even after his plan had been found out, the culprit remained calm. His face didn't even flinch as he responded. "Deepest apologies, Prince Korko. This servant is old and confused." Frustrated, a tired Korko stared Chowpik down for a while, before he gave up and looked over to the Red Castle instead. Not even the stone and wood could be any less responsive than this old bastard. "I'm not dealing with this bullshit today," he said. "I've been traveling for months to get here. So we'll just pretend we had a good talk. Then we came to the conclusion that we should go towards the castle and find a bed for me. How's that sound?" He hadn't even entered, but Korko already remembered why he had never liked the palace. "As Prince wishes." Though, Chowpik took a look behind the prince, this servant is inconsolable, but the rules of the palace do not allow the foreigners to enter. "They're my warriors and my guards. You want me to be without protection?" Korko asked wide-eyed. Wasn't this too shameless, even for the imperial family? "Prince misunderstands. Chowpik waved his bony hand around in defense. This old servant is only concerned with Prince's reputation. Since they have not yet been officially confirmed as. Fine, whatever. Go make room for them outside somewhere. While the minister turned and ordered 2 of his servants around, Korko had a premonition. To avoid any more nasty business, he might as well make the roles clear right away. I'll have to warn you, though. You best make sure my men are taken care of. If anything happens to them it will be on you. I understand. No, you don't understand, Korko growled, his stance lowered like a wild beast. If my men end up injured or dead, I'll split you in half from your head to your sack. At that point, I won't give a damn just how it would affect my reputation. I understand, Prince. As the old man kept up his smile through all the threats, Korko did his best to not punch his teeth in. He decided it was best to not look at the man and reduce contact in the future to a minimum. Instead, the prince looked up at the darkening sky. More and more, it seemed like a storm was brewing in the swirl of clouds. After most of the prince's entourage had been taken care of, Prime Minister Chowpik led Korko and Fidelio, the only warrior they couldn't bar from entry, into Pluritak Castle. They had just passed the entrance guards and were on their way up a flight of stairs to the sleeping quarters, when finally, for the first time in what seemed to have been an eternity, something went Korko's way. By an absolute stroke of luck, they met a group of 2, evidently on their way outside. Though the man who led the way was much older than Korko remembered and sported a short beard, he was still unmistakably, unbelievably, hilariously, the second prince of the Medalla Empire. The supposedly sleeping Prince Amauta Titu Sekundu Pluritak. There they stood, the first prince who had returned from overseas and the second prince who was about to go to bed. For a while they stared at each other as the widening grin on Korko's face threatened to split his head in 2. Prime Minister Chowpik's face was still frozen solid in its eternal smile. Meanwhile, Prince Amauta's eyes turned large as saucers as the implications of the meeting began to dawn on him. Korko knew that Amauta hadn't simply avoided his brother's return ceremony out of rudeness. It was common practice during meetings for the younger brother to politely greet the older brother first, something the second prince would be unwilling to do after he had established himself as a leading competitor in the throne succession. Let's go. Once he had regained his presence of mind, Amauta looked away, addressed his guest and then moved towards the exit as if nothing had happened. Oh no you don't. Korko realized what his brother was trying to do and rushed towards the exit in great strides. He arrived there first to block the way in a wide stance. Finally, something had gone his way and he would not let his brother's shamelessness get in the way of his own satisfaction. Amauta looked frustrated as Korko crossed his arms and raised his head to stare down at his little brother in provocation. After a tense moment of silence, Amauta could no longer ignore the truth before him and gave in. Second prince greets elder brother. Although his words were the minimum required for a proper greeting, he did not lower his head to match it. Crown Prince Korko greets his little brother, Korko grinned back. This prince is besides himself with joy that brother would have returned safely. The estate had heard horrible reports of brother's death. Still stiff, Amauta shuffled left and right, in search of an elegant angle he could use to squeeze past his brother. This would be where Korko's years of combat training came into full effect. Yeah, I heard those as well, he replied while he showed off his footwork to cut off his brother's escape. I hope that the dead prince didn't suffer or anything. This prince was on his way outside to welcome elder brother back, but was unfortunately late one step. It is fortunate to have met elder brother here, Amauta said with fake elation. By now he had accepted his lot and given up on his escape. And who is your friend? Korko asked with a suspicious look at the tall, fair-skinned man with the light brown hair and exotic clothing. Please let me introduce, brother. This is Albert Kalas, dignitary of the land of Borna. Lord Kalas, this is the eldest royal Prince Korko Pluritak. With an enthusiasm not fit for the occasion, the tall man went forward and shook the prince's hand. After, He used his very limited knowledge of High Yakua language to communicate. I am glad to meet you, Prince Korko. I am Albert. I hope our countries can work together well in trade. Without warning, the dignitary grabbed to his side, into a deep pouch he had slung around his shoulder. Quiet steps behind him told Korko that Fidelio had closed the distance, ready to cut the fool down should he attempt an assassination. However, the man remained unaware of his near death as he retrieved a small bottle. Please, take this quality wine from my company as a sign of friendship. Without a care, Korko casually took the bottle and turned to the Prime Minister. So foreigners are not allowed into the royal complex, was it? He asked with a flat tone as he raised an eyebrow. Lord Kalas is a dignitary of a friendly kingdom. So you're saying that being a foreign dignitary makes him not a foreigner somehow? Somehow, the politician's answer was shameless enough to raise Korko's other brow. This old man misspoke. Only foreigners of unverified origin are not allowed inside. Please excuse this servant's misstep, young prince, be calm. Although the old man tried to get out of his predicament by highlighting his age again, Korko was having none of it. Well, if you made such a simple mistake, maybe your age is getting to you. You should seriously consider retirement, old man. For the first time, Minister Chopik's eyebrows twitched into a frown, but only for a moment before they smoothed out again. This old man still has much to offer for the empire. If need be, even this old body shall be sacrificed. Okay, that's nice. So how about you help escort your dignitary outside? You won't allow him to stay here overnight, will you? Korko stepped aside to free up the exit. Of course, Prince, the old man answered, before he turned to the merchant. Please follow me, Lord Kalas. His hand forced by the prince's words, the old man had no choice but to lead the supposed dignitary called Albert out of the room and leave the guidance of Korko and his attendant to his lower-ranked servants. Korko was ecstatic. For once, things had totally gone the way he wanted. At this point, he didn't even mind his brother's earlier rudeness. Please excuse me, elder brother, Amauta mumbled as he turned to leave up the stairs. Not so fast, little bro. Korko shouted, and held his brother back at his arm. Bro. Confused, Amauta was dragged back. Now free from the watchful eye of the old man, Korko forgot the last bit of his etiquette and put his arm around his brother's shoulder. I've finally come home after so long, so I think it's time for a family reunion. I'm sure you have tons of questions for your elder brother burning a hole into your proverbial stomach. And hey look, I even brought some fancy drink from overseas just for you. Korko shook the bottle he had just been handed by Lord Kalas. With a frown, Amauta shook off Korko's hand and took a small step to the side. For a second, he seemed conflicted, before he faked a smile. Of course, brother. We should appreciate the new gardens before night time. Brother will surely enjoy them. Chapter 43 A Chat in the Garden. You are listening at novelfull.audio. One thing could not be denied. The new garden was truly beautiful. In a small, intricate pavilion placed in between rock formations, willow trees, bamboo forests and artificial square ponds, servants had placed a table with 2 chairs and 2 corresponding cups. Prince Korko took a seat while the men who had been tasked to guide Korko to his room observed from a distance. Apart from them, Fidelio looked at the spectacle between brothers with a frown. This is nice, Korko said as he looked behind. Indeed. The aesthetics of Chutwa are truly refined. For the first time since their reunion, Amauta's smile seemed genuine as he looked out over the garden. No, I meant the chairs, Korko replied. It's so weird how the Eastern lords insist on those terrible lounge chairs, especially during dinner time. That can't be good for your digestion. I guarantee you that half of those guys have terrible heartburn. So I really can't. When Korko geared up for one of his rants, he was interrupted by Fidelio's throat clear and came back to his senses. Anyways. The garden is pretty nice too, I guess. With a beaming smile, Amautu jumped on the conversation. Thank you, brother. I designed it myself. Over the past 6 years, I have studied the ways of the Chutwa people with great devotion. In Chutwa garden architecture, every tree, every statue, every blade of grass has meaning, but only put together do they form a coherent whole. It is the relationship between the things and the harmony formed out of that relationship that reveals the beauty of the world and points to the truth. Unfortunately, I am still a simple beginner in the deep Western arts. I have much to learn. In deep deference, the second prince of Medalla bowed his head to the plants around him. So you think we should get closer to the Chutwa then? You seem awfully impressed by them. The great Chutwa Empire is the largest, most powerful, most advanced civilization on Earth. No one can possibly compare with their might, knowledge and sophistication. Why should we not learn from them and attempt to become more alike? Anything else would be foolish. The great teachers have said, only when states are well governed is there peace in the world. After his initial excitement, Amautu paused, aware of the meaning behind his own words. Over the table, his view skewered Korko as the younger brother continued in a deep voice. I know why you have come back, brother, but this matter is too important for pride. I am the only one among us three who has been to the West, the only one who has been educated to become a good emperor for our people. Believe me, I will lead the empire into a new era of peace and prosperity. If you truly care for the people of Yakwalpa, you shall rescind your claim post-haste and support my ascension. While Prince Amautu held his speech in a confident voice, Korko shook the bottle in his hand in front of Amautu's righteous face. What about this then? Seems to me like you're not only choosing the West, but the East as well. A necessary evil, Amautu sneered. Those barbarians are just convenient as tools, that's all. They will help us develop our trade routes to the great Chutwa Empire. Once firmly entwined with their wisdom, our people will see the superiority of the scholastic way and improve their own lives to match. While Amautu dreamed of the distant future, Korko filled the bottom of both cups with the amber liquid and handed one drink to his brother. So what do you think about this great invention from the East then? Salute. In concord for the first time since being reunited, both brothers downed their drinks. Even then, they each kept an eye on the other the whole time. While Korko refilled the cups, Amautu tried his hardest to repress a coughing fit. Feeling angry and humiliated, he blamed the liquor on his reaction. It is a brutish drink fit only for barbarians. I would rather have a refined cup of Chutwa tea. This abomination will do nothing but poison the body and the spirit. Yeah, well, this is the strong one anyways, I don't think we should drink this stuff undiluted anyways. How would you know? Amautu asked with a raised brow. Says so on the front. There's a paper label glued on. Korko tipped his finger on the front of the green bottle. Anyways, if you were to drink the good version of this, which I have done, you would think differently. And a lot of nobles I've met on my way here are inclined to agree. Once this drink spreads among the estates, the Arcavian culture will have already influenced ours, whether you want it or not. When trade is open, ideas will flow freely. That has always been true. When every man is properly schooled to be a gentleman of outstanding moral conduct, they will themselves lay off these vulgar habits. Although he could have been shocked, Korko was bemused at his brother's outlandish idea instead. Do you really want to take away the wine from our people? That doesn't sound like a recipe for peace, it sounds like you're trying to provoke another civil war. Only this time it won't be north against south or land against coast, it will be everyone against you. That's why the country needs a wise ruler. To properly educate the nobles and prevent such a war. Amautu proclaimed as he jumped up from his chair. Again he looked away from his brother, into the distance. Confused, Korko followed Amautu's gaze, but he couldn't tell if his brother was looking at the bamboo or the window behind it. At this rate he would have to calm his little bro down before he started seeing things. Less getting upset, more getting drunk. Despite the idiocy of drinking a 60% brandy undiluted, Korko clinked cups with his brother again, which the younger unwillingly lifted to his lips for a sip. Korko however emptied his quickly, which gave him some space to lay out his point of view as the younger brother still fought the beverage. You know, I spent a lot of time with those people you call vulgar barbarians. They are not perfect. They have many ideas and practices I would vehemently object to. But they're not useless. There is a lot to learn there. Arcavia has accumulated much knowledge completely unknown to our people. Why can't we make use of that as well? Rather than answer, Amauta frowned and sipped more of his drink. Still, Korko wouldn't give up trying to convince his brother. I went to the east and you went to the west, countries and cultures completely different from our own. When you ask which of the two is better, then I can only say that no matter who and no matter where, no one ever has all the answers. I think that's the first thing both of us should recognize, Korko understood in a rare moment of self-reflection. Brother, you would not be so unsure if you had studied the great scriptures under my teacher Iktaka. You will see, I will prove that the great way will lead to eternal peace. Korko let out a sigh as he re-corked the bottle with a slap. It seemed his brother had been infected by ideology. In a sense, Korko considered ideological conviction more dangerous than simple greed or ambition. Ideological thinkers were never right and never changed things for the better. That was his own ideological conviction, at the very least. In any case, it seemed like any amicable resolution with his brother would be difficult. Well, I'll look forward to it. Though. Korko looked up at the already darkening sky. By now the shadows of dark clouds had covered the garden square in its entirety, and only a few islands of dim yellow light were left to protect them. A distant rumbling told of the coming storm. One person can't do much. The princes of the great Medalla Empire wish for a leisurely chat in the garden, but it looks like the heavens have different plans. We should break this up before the divine punishment soaks the great princes. Even the heavens will have to respect the wisdom of man. I will be the one to show that reason will always triumph over force. Amauta wobbled as he stood up to shout a defiant declaration, though who exactly he was defying was unclear. Of course you will. Good night, brother. Then this prince will excuse himself. After his stiff, trained goodbye, Amauta swaggered away with an unsteady gait, while one of the servants ran after him to make sure he wouldn't trip and create a morbid new feature in one of the pretty, decorative ponds. Meanwhile, Korko looked towards his attendant and the Prime Minister's henchman. Let's go. Don't you guys still have a job to do? Underscore 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 underscore. Yet another guard patrol walked past them. This had been the third, and there were further warriors stationed around almost any corner as well as down in the courtyards, as Korko could observe from the open walkways. It seemed like the fight for succession had made everyone nervous. As they were led up some more stairs, Fidelio and Korko spoke in Bornish so no one would overhear. Did that man really just gift our own brandy to you? The nerve of some people, to sell it as wine from his company, Fidelio complained with a scowl. Well, at least it wasn't poisoned. If I managed to discern nothing else during the sit.in with my brother, at least that one I can be sure of, Korko replied without worry. So, what do we think of Prince Amauta? He thinks he should take responsibility for the country and he has a plan he fully believes in. If what he said was largely true, then at least his goals are laudable. But even if we have the same goal, he'll never let me set the agenda. There is no way he will back down on that. And considering what those Chutwa scholars believe in, what I know of it, he might be extremely dangerous. Did you hear the fervor in his voice once he loosened up a bit? We should be careful about him and take a good look at his people. Got it. While master and servant had made plans, Chopik's henchman had halted in front of a sliding door. This will be the accommodations for Prince Korko's warrior attendant, henchman number 1 said with a false smile plastered on his face. Right. So mine are next door. Korko replied. Henchman number 2 made a vague gesture down the hall. They are not far, Prince. It will only be a little while longer. So not even within sight. You sure about that? Korko asked the henchman duo with narrowed eyes. Both immediately went down on their knees. This servant made a mistake. Servant asks Prince to show magnanimity. This servant simply followed orders. Please do not make matters impossible for this lowly one. Yes. Korko really disliked the sniveling court etiquette. However, he didn't dislike it as much as his attendant did. What did you say, you sniveling worms? Enraged, the giant warrior rushed towards henchman number 2 and dragged him to his feet by the scruff of his neck. You dare deny the crown prince even one guard as protection. I may as well cut you down right here. With movements far quicker than his plump stature would suggest, Korko held onto his servant's arm before it could draw the axe at Fidelio's waist. It's fine. Even though the prince had put all the conviction and gravitas of a future emperor into his words, Fidelio only answered with a stare of disbelief. Korko would have to do better than this, so he continued once more in Bornish. Look, they really are just following orders, so getting angry at them helps no one. I said it before, but no one will try to harm me tonight. Not even Spuria would be that stupid. Lackeys. Don't lackeys me. This is what they want. If we create a scene, the palace brood can claim that we are uncivilized, unworthy of the throne. Unless we follow along, we'll play right into their hands. Now let them go. That's an order. Although he still looked unwilling, Fidelio didn't say another word as he let down Chopic's henchman to collapse into a heap of sadness, before he returned to his place half a step behind his master. Okay, I forgive you, Korko said towards the 2 terrified minions. Now get up and show me my room. Fidelio. Give me my backpack. Still without a word, Fidelio handed over one of the 2 packets he had been carrying and then saw off his master. Of course Korko understood that Fidelio was only worried for his safety, but they couldn't afford any mistakes. Not on his first day back. He would just have to apologize to his friend later. After the prince had been led around for a bit, they arrived at a door guarded by 2 Sippy warriors, elites of the royal family. They were easily recognizable from the long, red feather plume flowing from their ornate helmets and down their backs. Without a word, he entered the sliding door and took a quick look around his accommodations. It was somewhat small for a prince, but clean and luxuriously decorated, with patterned carpets covering the floor and 2 of the walls, while the far wall was broken up by a large paper window. The furniture also included a table with chairs, a wardrobe, a shelf with bamboo rolls and incense for meditation, a small nightstand and a spacious bed for rest. Korko deemed it a better fit for sleeping than the back of the donkey cart he had frequented for the last few nights. Thus satisfied, he turned around and handed a few coins to the servants who were already waiting for their customary bribe outside the door. I want my suit dry cleaned by Monday. And no disturbances. And thus the crown prince rammed the door shut in the face of the baffled and confused henchman. Underscore 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 underscore. As the night had progressed, the drizzle of the rain had turned into an all-out storm that shrouded the entire castle in darkness. The wind whipped curtains of rain against the walls of the castle while the atmosphere shook to the repeated boom of thunder and lightning. In the man's line of work, this was considered ideal weather. Dressed in a spacious black robe and with a dim oil lamp in one hand and a blackened short-dot sword with a triangular blade in the other, he sneaked down the empty hallways, until he arrived in front of the unguarded room. He knew that the nominal guards had just left on an emergency call and would not be back for a while. After he had put the lamp on the ground, he stood there motionless, until a gust of wind appeared, to swallow all noise furing his work. Almost without a sound, the door slid open, as a cone of light got wider and wider to illuminate the room. As the robed figure lifted the sword, the illumination encroached on the bed where the intruder's target would be sleeping. Chapter 44 Life Insurance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With a frown, Korko looked over down to the cup of coffee he had brewed before. The shimmer on the cold, black drink surface was just about the only thing he could see. Of course the prince was sure that no one would be stupid enough to attack him here. However, he was no fool either, so he had brought himself to waste some of their precious coffee, a luxury product from halfway across the world, to make it through the night without sleep. At first Korko was convinced that he had been right, that tonight had been a waste of coffee and a perfectly good bed, but then he saw the light. Right away he looked back up, to find the door open bit by bit, a dark figure in the entrance silhouetted by the light behind it. As ice rushed through his veins, the prince became wide awake, more than the coffee could have ever managed for him. He fell back on his bed and reached under his pillow, his fingers closing on the dagger he had hidden there. Once more he got up, to be blinded by the dim light from outside. In the room's doorway, the figure still stood there and watched. The lighting from the lamp and the roaring storm outside made the already large figure even more imposing. For the fraction of a second, the two stared at each other, until the intruder shot forward with inhuman speed. In response, Korko threw his dagger on instinct and rolled away to get the bed between them. With a sharp clank, the dagger bounced off what should have been heavy armor under the robes, but the throw had still shown the desired effect. In reflex, the attacker had flinched backwards as the well-placed dagger had gone for his head. Has to be enough, Korko thought as he grabbed into the folded leather on his nightstand and turned around. By this time his opponent had recovered and leapt over the bed in a single, impossible jump as he thrust his sword towards Korko's heart, another glint in the darkness. Despite his imminent death, there was a strange calm in Korko's actions. Any doubts or fears were suppressed by the rush of adrenaline. The world around him felt like it had slowed to a crawl as his left hand went for the assassin's wrist in an attempt to divert the blade. The tip brushed past his heart and left a deep cut in his left shoulder as the force of the attacker pushed Korko's back onto the nightstand. With his assailant's blade in an awkward position and his own hand free, he pointed at the man's chest and pressed the trigger. The enormous boom of the pistol was drowned out by the raging thunder outside, but it made the projectile no less deadly. Finally, for the first and last time, Korko saw his attacker's eyes. Enlarged from shock, the man's ice-blue eyes stared at his killer, as his hand lost grip on the sword and he sank to the ground. Although the battle had only taken a second, Korko could feel the sweat run down his face. With heaving breaths he looked at the man with the massive hole in his chest. Well. Shit. He had been far too arrogant. Never would he have expected for them to be so brazen and attack him on the first night. Luckily, he had been prepared. Back in Arcavia, he had learned how to handle assassins and kidnappers through years of constant danger. The presence of guards everywhere in the castle had also done nothing to help Korko feel safe. Those servants had led him up a flight of stairs and along several corridors until they had arrived here. He had been separated from his men, on purpose, and so he knew he had to take care of security himself. As soon as the door had been closed behind him, Korko had checked every corner of his room for hidden paths or hidden people. Then he had placed his weapons, brewed his coffee, and waited. Bedouin still in a daze, he looked down on the weapon which had saved his life. After only a single shot, the pistol's short, but overly thick barrel was deformed beyond salvation. This one couldn't be used anymore. He put away the now useless gun and ran to the still open doorway. He looked outside and, after finding the hallway empty, took the intruder's lamp inside and shut the door. It seemed like the storm had drowned out the sounds of their struggle, but Korko couldn't be sure when the guards would come back. Suddenly, a numb knock in his shoulder crescendoed into searing pain. The effects of the adrenaline had worn off. A look at the wound showed that the cut was not too deep, but he was bleeding far too much. If he couldn't stem the tide, he would soon be too weak to fight, or even move. Thus, he rushed back to the nightstand and suppressed the tremble in his hands to grab the bottle of high-proof brandy he had left there. His fingers too clumsy for any work, he uncorked the bottle with his teeth and put one of the meditative bamboo slips from behind the bed into his mouth. A few quick breaths to ready himself, then he bit down hard as he poured the alcohol over his open wound. The sound of the scream was swallowed by the wind, just like any other. After he had gotten back his dagger to fashion a pressure bandage out of his bedding, he finally bent down to inspect the dead intruder. With the robe's hood down and the helmet off, the attacker had become a person. A strangely lanky face, a nose crooked as if it had been broken several times and, most importantly, pale skin and red hair, unusual even in Arcavia and completely unheard of in Medalla. The attacker had been a foreigner. The plate mail armor under his robe confirmed Corco's suspicion, though the steel might not have been the highest quality, considering the bloodied, gaping hole in the man's chest. Corco started to put on his own protection, the old chain mail, and added gloves and backpack to his outfit as he considered his situation. Even though he should be safe as soon as he met a Medallan guard, he was still in serious danger. Whoever planned the attack couldn't be too brazen in their actions and take him out in the open, but Corco had been wrong before. At this point, he would rather be safe than dead. If he left the room, he couldn't know whether or not the first guard he found would be on some suicide mission and ram a knife into his stomach. His eyes raced around the room in search of an answer. He still had one pistol left, the one he had held for Dedrick, but with only a pistol, a dagger and his chain mail he didn't fancy his chances against who knew how many elite guards. He guessed that even healthy and uninjured, he couldn't take on even one sippy warrior after he had used his final shot. Still trapped in thought, a loud knock on the door brought Corco back to reality. "Anyone in there?" someone shouted over the rain. It looked like the missing guards had returned, and considering they had no other reason to knock in the middle of the night, it looked like they were in on it. This was worse than he thought. Without many options, Corco decided to bet. In a deep, gruff voice, the prince shouted a few Bornish towards the door. "Done soon, I'm cleaning up." Whether or not the men outside understood his excuse, they let off for now. Precious time, as quick as he could, Corco took the black robe and full helmet off the corpse and fumbled them over his chain mail and his pack. He looked back at the terrible wound which had killed the now revealed man and realized something he had forgotten. As he kneeled next to the half-cooled corpse, Corco squinted his eyes. He would rather not see this. His face scrunched up from disgust, he jabbed his gloved hand into the fist-sized hole he had created. Iron in his nose and raw liver on his hand, the prince suppressed his gag reflex as he rummaged around in the man's torso. Finally, he managed to pull a large chunk of deformed metal from the wound, like a splash of paint on canvas, black and shiny from the blood. Just in case, he thought as he cleaned the piece and put it away. Those pistols were his life insurance. He wouldn't want anyone to find out how the attacker had died. Done with his preparations and the lead ball secured, all that was left was to remove the body. Under his own grunts, Corco dragged the corpse over to the far side of the room and heaved it out of the window. His eyes followed the body down onto the smooth, slippery stones of the sloped wall and into the raging Argu River below. During his inspection just a few hours ago, the view had looked completely safe from any attack, but now it had turned into a death trap. At least the lack of a body could buy him precious time. Just as the heard a second knock, he closed the window. Impatient, ready to risk it all, Corco put down the visor of his helmet, put up the robe's hood and smothered the lamp's flame. His chances would be better in the dark. Then, he grabbed the lamp and the assassin's blade and drove open the door with force. Before the guards could even react, he had out of the room and past them. "What happened?" "You done," he heard from behind. As he mumbled something vague and waved his hand with the bloodied sword towards the warriors at his back, Corco just kept walking into the darkness, until he had made it around the corner and into safety. At this point, He just hoped that whoever had orchestrated the attack would not decide to get rid of the witnesses. Chapter 45 Accomplice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Within the Silver Palace, Korko had always felt out of place. His mother, the former empress, had been southern nobility. After a grueling civil war, the marriage had been supposed to seal lasting peace between the north and the south. However, things didn't go as planned. People didn't forget that quickly. Fueled by individual grudges left over after years of constant warfare, the animosities towards the young empress never ceased. As the heir destined to heal the wounds between the north and south, Korko himself had also been under constant pressure in the capital. As a result, spent most of his time either inside of his own Raven courtyard in the castle or at Senia, the small southern estate his mother had brought into House Pluritak as part of her dowry. However, his constant absence only gave those with sinister motives an excuse to label Korko as weak and sickly, not suitable for succession. And once they had poisoned mother and son, their accusations had become true. In any case, what mattered about Korko's history at this moment was that he didn't know the family castle all that well. He had escaped his room a while ago and now he was tired, bleeding and hopelessly lost. The dark of night and the roaring storm also did nothing to improve his situation. Intruder! Catch the assassin! A foreigner has killed the prince. The shouts had echoed through the floors for a while now. Someone had leaked his supposed assassination and his greatest worry had become reality. By now the guards swarmed the walkways to catch the intruder. Korko, meanwhile, had no idea who to trust, so when he had walked down the memorized path to Fidelio's room, he had been blocked by the oncoming guards and had decided to take a detour. Thus he had lost his way. With every additional minute out in the open, his pursuers drew the circle around him more and more tightly. As he spotted a light move up the stairs behind his back, he rushed forward, in frantic search of a solution. After only a few steps, another light appeared right in his front. Trapped, although Korko's chances were bleak, he wouldn't go out without a fight. As his fingers tightened around the assassin's sword, the prince got ready to make the largest possible commotion. He wanted to believe that not all the family warriors were part of tonight's attempt on his life. Even if they were, he would make his head as costly as possible. Sometimes simple viciousness could trump the best laid plans. Although Korko had already prepared himself to fight for his life, he realized his mistake after only a few more steps. The light in his front had not come from another guard, but from inside one of the rooms instead. A resident must have been woken up from all the ruckus, be it the storm or the shouts of assassination. Last chance, the prince thought as he moved up and banged his fist against the doorframe. Open up. The rooms are to be searched for hidden assassins, he shouted. Through the paper door, Korko could see the owner of the room shuffle up to the door and slide it open to peek outside. Against the strength of the owner, Korko drove frame open with his foot and stormed inside. His rush overwhelmed his poor victim and drove her back into the room. To avoid any trouble, Korko put his hand over her mouth and his knife under her neck. Though the room's occupant was a woman, Korko hardly had the leisure to care. As he forced her back some more, the helpless damsel took a large step back to gain leverage and jammed the dagger in her hand right into her attacker's stomach. With a clink, the blade got stuck on Korko's chain mail. You could never spend enough on good armor. Drop it or I'll cut your throat, the prince growled. For a few eternal seconds, he stared into the girl's defiant green eyes and realized that a threat wouldn't be enough. I'd rather not have to, he added in a softer tone. This was the girl's last chance. Korko had to close the door soon, before a guard would come by. With a clang, the knife dropped onto the wooden floor. Korko kicked the weapon into a corner and then turned to close the door. He was safe, for now. Back to the window, he barked at his prisoner as he pointed with his sword. What do you want? Although the girl's voice had a light accent, there was no fear. That I want you to get back a bit. Thought I said that already. If you please. After the girl had inched to the back wall of the room, Korko took off the assassin's helmet. Free from the constraint, he began to cut apart the assassin's robe as well. He didn't want to get it stuck halfway and make himself vulnerable. What exactly is your plan, revealing yourself like this? Shouldn't an assassin keep his face hidden? Despite seeing a man undress himself in front of her, the room's owner didn't seem to care much about his actions. She still moved, bit by bit towards her left as she engaged in casual conversation. I'm not an assassin. For the first time, Korko gave the woman a careful look. A bit short and a bit thin, unfortunately for her she didn't meet the beauty standards of her time. Despite her stature, she appeared well trained, maybe a guard to some high-born lady. However, the girl also seemed quite young, around 20 years at most, had a pretty face and well-maintained skin, which might have made her a lady herself. From her accent and the tone of her skin it seemed like she would be from a surrounding country, if not from Medalla itself. Now that Korko had finished his analysis, he informed his opponent of the results, to prevent any accidents. I'm half a head taller than you and considerably heavier. I have armor and a sword. Unless you have an army hidden on that shelf to your left, I wouldn't try my luck and stop moving. Now. The girl gave him a critical look before she stepped back, an unwilling stare aimed at the shelf and whatever she had hidden there. Once his host had been pacified, Korko got down on one knee and looked at his shoulder. It was starting to go numb from the pressure, but at least the wound hadn't bled through the bandage for now. Let's just hope they didn't splurge on poison, he thought. Even so, he had to get some help fast if he wanted to keep his arm and his life. I'll ask you a few questions and would appreciate answers, okay? Okay. Korko took off the backpack which had been hidden under the black robe and started to rummage inside as he continued his mental thread. Where are we? The look she gave him this time was dumbfounded, but it seemed like she had made the decision not to provoke the unknown intruder. As such, she still answered. Pluritac Castle. Where in the castle? A guest room. I don't know where. Korko had no idea how the castle's interior had been rearranged in 7 years, so this would be less than helpful. Time for Plan B then. He took out an ethanol compass to check the direction. Back across the Welfalic Sea he was forced to build it himself. After all, he had to make sure advanced navigational technology such as this would not stay there, with people who could become his enemies as soon as he became emperor. Tell me what's outside that window there. If we're both lucky and you do a good job, I'll be out of your hair soon. The prince used his sword to point towards the large window next to the girl. Although she couldn't see anything through paper, darkness and rain, the girl still looked over in reflex. It's a courtyard garden in the castle. Okay. You know how high we are. 2nd floor. Korko looked down at the compass in his hand as he mumbled instructions. Good, good. Can you hear the river? Not now, I mean usually. Outside or with the window open? That I don't believe I can, she said with a frown. Wait. What? Korko looked up at her and then down at his compass to check if it was broken. The compass was fine. Which could only mean. Isn't this my old Raven yard then? How the hell did it turn into a place for guests? I thought those servants were just fucking with me when they didn't bring me here. His temper provoked, the enraged prince looked up at the girl again. And now that I think about it, who the fuck are you? From hearing your accent. Aren't you an outsider? Sure to avoid large movements, the girl nodded her head. No foreigners allowed. No foreigners my fucking ass you old fucker. Oh boy, this one's probably a dignitary too. How fucking shit can he actually be at, human? Hey. As Korko paced up and down to vent his frustration, the girl tried to move back towards the shelf, but the prince's angry yell stopped her in her tracks once again. The ensuing silence also managed to bring Korko back to reality. His temper couldn't help him here, only survival mattered. Now he finally knew where he was, but unfortunately, he would have to cross half the castle to reach his goal. The two were once again frozen stiff, each of them lost in frantic search for a solution to their own predicament. Fuck him. I'm not gonna make this easy, Korko gnarled through his teeth. Determined to get to the last, he drew the second pistol from his backpack. Hey, foreigner girl. Have you seen a cannon before? Or what about a hand cannon? Of course, she answered, as she drew further towards the back of the room. Without a doubt, the girl was getting more and more upset by her guest's erratic behavior. However, Korko didn't have the time to care. Well, this is called a wheelock pistol, he announced across the room as he started to load the weapon. It's a hand cannon, but better. The barrel is so thick it can punch through the most solid armor. Believe me, I tried. The charge and projectile are stored in these little paper cartridges. He bit open the paper and kept loading. When you push the trigger, this mechanism here brushes against a piece of pyrite, which creates sparks. Which ignite the gunpowder, which ignites the paper cartridge, which releases the bullet, which won't end well for you. With the demonstration completed, he now held a loaded gun in his hand. So with that out of the way, here is what I would like you to do. Underscore 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 underscore. He had had enough. They had been searching in the storm and rain all night but had found no trace of this assassin. It didn't matter anyways. Crown Prince Korkapeka was already dead. Even if he found the assassin, it wasn't like he could do anything other than get himself killed. He wasn't like any of those elite warriors. Normally, he wouldn't even be allowed in here. Now however, someone had mobilized every available hand to help with the search. Unfortunately for him, he had two of those, one on each wimpy arm. Hello. Guardsman. From across the hallway, a sudden sound ripped him out of his misery. Someone had called out to him, from inside a half-opened room. Unhappy with his lot, he walked up to do his duty. Could you please tell me what is happening? I am afraid, the young woman inside the room whispered. Young lady, it is dangerous outside. Please do not. Excuse me. I cannot hear you over the storm. Please come inside first, the girl shouted as she stepped back to make room. Just as he went inside, just as he thought that this would be a good excuse to get away from his duties for a second, an arm went around his neck and his world went dark. Underscore 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 underscore. Inside the room, the guard's lifeless body slid to the ground. Korko had waited opposite the girl, his pistol raised towards her to make sure she would obey his commands. When the guard had entered and was still distracted by Korko's accomplice, he had stuck the assassin's knife under the man's helmet and up into his skull. Although it remained stuck there like a plug, the wound around the knife still spouted out blood like a leaky pipe. Nauseous, Korko turned around to get away from the grueling feedback he had felt in his hands the moment he had scrambled the man's brain. With trembling hands, he closed the door and packed away the pistol. While he kept himself busy in his attempt not to retch, the girl had finally reached that shelf of hers and drawn a short sword of her own. Korko's eyes turned large in shock as the girl stormed him. Careless again, just about, he managed to deflect her hasty attack from his head onto his chain mail. Now in close, Korko grabbed her tightly around her back to trap her sword arm. Unhand me, you beast, the girl screamed. You have any idea what they'll think if they find a dead guard in your room? Hold your tongue, creature, she kept shouting as she tried to wriggle free her arm. Korko was still focused on diplomacy. You'll be an accomplice to a prince's assassination. No matter who you are, you'll die. It seemed that, even in her anger, the girl would still listen to reason. As soon as she understood her position, she had stopped screaming and resorted to a glare instead. You want to get out of this? You'll need my help. What could an assassin possibly do to help me? The girl sneered in response. Well, right now, betting on an unknown assassin seems like your best shot. After a few more seconds of their staring contest, the girl dropped her second weapon for the night. Korko let go and took some distance. He then tried to take off the cumbersome chain mail. Of course, his numb arm didn't make things easier, and he got stuck halfway. Crap. Hey, accomplice. Some help here. Gingerly, the girl walked up and pulled the chains over Korko's head without a word of complaint. Oh, hey, didn't think that would work. Thanks, I guess. As always when he tried to distract himself, Korko started to talk. In the meantime, he also took off the cheap helmet and leather armor from the guard's corpse. As much as possible, he tried to avoid the growing pool of blood during the process. So what is your plan exactly? The girl asked him with crossed arms and furrowed brows. It'll be easy. I take the guard's stuff and get out of here under the cover of the storm. Gotta get some proper first aid for that arm. We dumped the guy's body out of the window, assassin's sword and all, which hopefully buys you enough time so you won't be arrested, tortured and killed by tomorrow morning. At which point I'll magnificently show up and exonerate you. An assassin, exonerate me. Once again the girl sneered. Not an assassin, remember. Korko pointed to his chest, before he gave the girl a second critical look. You, on the other hand, are far too calm through all of this. How you dealt with that guard as well. Maybe you're the assassin here. Again silent, the girl shrugged off the accusation. Anyways, Korko continued, I'm not the assassin, I'm his target. Once I get through the night, I'll be the most powerful person in this castle. Well, on paper at least. And the most powerful member of the royal family cannot trust his own guards. The girl, far less squeamish than the prince, looked down at the corpse as they carried it to the window. You haven't been here for long, have you? Korko looked at her with pity. You'll have to learn quickly then. If the people in my family are good at one thing, it's shamelessness. And murder. If my family is good at two things, it's shamelessness and murder and... Out of nowhere, a strange thought popped into his head and interrupted his thoughts. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, he finished. Huh, the girl stared at the strange prince, confused and incredulous about her new accomplice. Even so, they heaved the body over the windowsill and dropped it down into the mud of the garden. Against the wall of rain which washed into the room, Korko closed the paper window again. Anyways, he said as he turned and brushed the water out of his face. Go take care of my stuff for now, I'll take it back tomorrow. Korko put on the guard's helmet to complete his disguise and walked towards the front door, back again towards the dark hallways of Pluritak Castle. Crown Prince Korkapeka Tita Pluritak owes you a debt. Korko was already out of the room as he turned around one last time. And sorry for the mess and all. And with that, he was gone. Underscore 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 all throughout the night, Fidelio had sat awake and ready. He was aware of the commotion outside, but could do nothing. Going out now would only make him a suspect. Maybe it would play right into the hands of whoever had organized the attack. Nervous and worried, he sat on his bed, his axe in hand and waited for a message or for day to come. The sudden knock on the door could only mean the former. Either that, or the attackers were coming for him next. Enter, he shouted across the room as he stood up and got ready for a fight. It's me. Drenched, bloody and exhausted, his master threw off his helmet as he fell into the room. Korko was finally safe. Chapter 46. To cancel out the double negative, you are listening at novelfull.audio. On the morning after the assassination, the entire castle was in an uproar. Although the sun hadn't crossed the horizon in full yet, the small court was filled with people. Normally, the court would handle all internal affairs of the imperial family, and this time, it had assembled to find out just how to deal with the second death of Prince Korko. All the actors of the play had already taken their positions around the dais and the backless throne on top, the court's centerpiece. To the right of the throne, the empire's Prime Minister Chowpik watched the proceedings in total silence. To its left sat the former concubine and current empress mother, Spuria Achilia. Finally, in front of the throne, the second prince of the empire, Amauta Titipluretak, faced the two in a defiant stance. However, this empress was informed that Prince Amautu should have been the last to see Prince Korko. Which proves nothing. This prince wonders, however, about the prime minister's servants who were guiding Prince Korko last night. Wouldn't they have been around brother later than myself? The spear point aimed at himself, the prime minister finally awoke from the hibernation he had held since the start of the proceedings. Prince Amautu, this old man is merely a servant himself. Those three men were also servants of the imperial family and would never listen to a lower official like this one. With practiced calm, Chowpik lowered his head and put his hands together in apology. So where are these men then? This prince will question them himself. Unfortunately, after their heinous betrayal, the lowly beasts attempted escape and were put to death by patrol guards on patrol. How convenient that is for some. At Amautu's remark, and before he could take further aim at the old politician, the empress mother chimed in once again. It is unfortunate, but this empress has heard news from Prime Minister Chowpik. Last night, the minister was sent away by Prince Amautu himself on an excuse as he tried to guarantee the prince would reach his sleeping quarters safely. A blatant lie. I did no such thing. Amautu stepped forward, but saw the guards tighten their hands around their weapons. Frustrated, he stepped back, into the spot of the accused. Then why would Prince Amautu spend the time drinking with his brother in the garden? As prince's mother, this empress should know her children best and was always saddened by the estranged relationship between the princes. It broke her heart to see the two in constant quarrels, but never would this empress have expected her own son to hedge such cruel plans. This empress hopes that, as her son, Prince Amautu will be able to prove his innocence, but the evidence appears irrefutable. As the ancients say, a true scholar is always forthright in his motives and true in his actions. I would never stab my brother in the back. There are many in this city who can attest to my impeccable moral conduct, unlike some others in this room. Amautu once again made uncomfortable suggestions toward his two accusers, but the small court had come prepared. What is Prince trying to say? Even for a royal prince, this is unacceptable. Outrageous. As if planned in advance, some of the waiting officials on the sides of the room sprang into action and recreated the chaos of the previous night's storm within the small court. Their bluster drowned out all criticism, valid or not. Within all that courtly mess, the front door sprang open and with a sudden bang flew against its stopper. The door stopped as much as the proceedings, all eyes of the court bored themselves into the breathless guard who had caused the interruption. Empress Mother, this is. Sorry to disappoint everyone, but this prince has always been pretty lousy at dying. Although his left arm rested in a sling, the dead Prince Korko and his attendant strode in front of the throne, to the stunned silence of the crowd. On any other day, Korko would relish in the reactions, but today his eyes were glued to the immovable smile of the Prime Minister. Remember what I said to you yesterday, old man. I wasn't joking. With a smile of his own, Korko gave out a death threat, but the old minister was even calmer. This old man is beside himself with joy that Prince is still healthy, he said, immovable like a statue. Right. So those servants of yours are dead then. Prince Korko, should you not greet your imperial mother? The Empress Mother butted in on Korko's fun, but he was not in any mood to play along. So who died and made you my mother? Oh, yeah, I remember. How dare he? Not even a prince can ignore royal etiquette. At her officials' faked outrage, the queen tried to appear magnanimous in the face of her officials' faked outrage, and so she raised her hand to silence her henchman's accusation. However, her narrowed eyes and clenched jaws attested to her true nature. Prince Korko has been away for quite some time and would not be aware of these details. In fact, this humble woman has been elevated to the status of Empress Mother a full 4 months ago. Only by a hair did Korko manage to stifle a derisive laugh, though his smile grew even wider. So then that would have been after my father died. How exactly did that work, becoming empress without an emperor? Under Korko's probing tone, spurious fists clenched and her eyes widened as she stared at him in frustration. Korko was confused. Had the vain woman really thought he would just play pretend like everyone else, just because some old geezers had decided to take bribes? Meanwhile, he felt another round of accusations coming his way from the sidelines, and so he rushed back to the issue at hand before he would be droned out like his brother had been. So no one has been arrested so far. Let's say some maid or warrior with a weird accent and a lot of knives. As thought back to the events from last night, he asked not only about the Arcavian assassin, but also about his accomplice. He hadn't forgotten just what kind of danger he had gotten that girl into with his intrusion. So far, the only known subjects are the 2 dead servants. It is quite unfortunate, Chow Pik answered. Since those servants are dead already, who killed them? Their death is pretty convenient for whoever planned last night's attack, don't you think? I would like to have the names of those guards and a chance to question them. As the murder victim, I feel like I should at least be involved in the process. Of course, Prince Korko. If Chow Pik was worried, he didn't show it on his face. And what about the 2 guards who were at my door last night? Who might Prince be talking about? During last night's assassination attempts, 2 Sippy warriors were outside my room and let in a killer. I have heard their voices and seen their faces. Shouldn't they be easy to identify? Crown Prince might think so, but a real Sippy would never betray the imperial family. Surely they were fakes placed there in advance by the attacker's machinations. Like a man with machinations, Chow Pik spat out answers as if he had predicted every single question long ago. However, Korko had come prepared as well. Okay, so then who looks after the Sippy equipment? He is either involved or he can't even count his own uniforms, in which case he is so incompetent that he shouldn't be anywhere near a position of power. That's. With the Prime Minister finally off balance, Korko followed up with a second push. What about the palace's guard captain? Those 2 warriors stood outside my room for an entire night and no one noticed that they didn't belong. There is only one way to explain last night's attack. Many men in the palace were either bought or they didn't do their jobs. To prevent accidents in the future, I think we should do some proper cleaning. It is as Prince says. This old minister will arrange for a slow and careful investigation of the culprits. With his politician's answer, the Prime Minister was clearly playing for time, but Korko wasn't done just yet. So now that we know about the corruption and incompetence of the Master of the Armory and the head of the Imperial Guard. Who was it that put those corrupt, incompetent men into their positions, I wonder? Korko narrowed his eyes as he looked at the Prime Minister's pristine smile. Exactly. No uncultured warrior servant should be making these decisions in the first place. Finally, Amautu re-entered the conversation, not to Korko's surprise. In fact, he had counted on his brother's support from the start. Earlier, Korko had been listening in on the farce inside, while Fidelio had kept the helpless guard in check. For now, the Crown Prince would sell a favor to his brother and make sure the old man and old woman would not get what they wanted. However, even as the 2 powerful figures by the throne became the target of accusations, there were still many in the room willing to play human shield for them. Prince Korko, as a ruler one should always strive for magnanimity. Prince should not be so anxious to pursue every minor matter. With his best unimpressed look, Korko stared down the man in question. He was young for a member of the small court and not someone the Crown Prince had ever met, so he must have been promoted within the last few years. The young official was also the one who had spoken up for concubine Spuria before. It was obvious who had placed him. So you're saying the assassination of an imperial prince is a small matter? Korko probed. Are you saying that it's trivial if a prince is killed? That we should just let all those people go because killing me would be no big deal, is that it? Uncomfortable, the henchman shifted his weight before he whispered his response. Isn't Prince healthy? So it's fine to try and kill a prince as long as the attempt doesn't work out. What kind of message does that send out exactly? And why are you so careful to defend those attackers anyways? Maybe you should be investigated as well. What do you think? Just as the prince was heating up his proverbial vacuum to suck all the dirt out of the palace, Spuria could no longer sit still. Prince Korko may be correct. The traitors responsible should be found and persecuted. That is, however, no reason to attack faithful servants of House Pluratak. This empress believes the focus of the court should be on those responsible, rather than on wild accusations. As such, she turned towards Prime Minister Chowpik. The investigation should be conducted by someone uncompromised. Prime Minister is already old and can no longer fulfill his duties. It might be time for Prime Minister to consider retirement. Finally, Korko widened his focus and observed the woman who had called herself his mother earlier. Tall, plump and with impeccable posture, the gray-haired woman threw her ally to the wolves the moment he became troublesome, and she did so with a smile. Korko's mind raced as he tried to solve the puzzle before him. Could it be possible that the number of factions collected in this room were not 2, but 3? He made a decision. Maybe for the moment, Chowpik was worth more alive than dead. That won't help anyone either. In times as chaotic as these, we will need the Prime Minister's experience more than ever. I think he should be the one to lead the investigation on my killers. Though again, I'd prefer to be involved. At least now, Chowpik. A valuable source of information. Would owe him a debt. Though he doubted the politician's credit, it was still a chance to catch up on 7 years of missed court politics. In reply to Korko's sudden change, the Empress frowned for a while, lost in thought. In the end, she tried her hand at a motherly smile and answered. Of course. Whatever Korko wishes, Mother will comply. Then how about we start by declaring me not dead, still alive? That'd be good. I know I've already died twice and it really should just cancel out, but I would feel much better if someone would finally say it. I wonder if that's a problem, Mother. Naturally. With all of her experience in falsehood, the Empress Mother ignored the vitriol charged into Korko's final word as she put on her most benevolent smile. Needs practice, Korko thought, while he pushed his advantage. And my men should be allowed inside the palace complex. Last night should have shown well enough that I need the protection. Of course. Once again, Lady Achilia hid her true emotions behind her answer, before she turned to the court scribe. Let it be known that Prince Korko is safe and sound and has finally returned to the royal court. Since it is a day of celebration, a banquet shall be held the day after tomorrow, to reintroduce Prince Korko to the lords of Medalla. It sure feels good to be alive again, but if we all agree that I'm not dead, shouldn't that read, Crown Prince? I'm sure Lady Achilia was just confused for a while. Unfortunately, after Prince's supposed death the Crown Prince position was revoked by the Ancestral Hall. This court has no power to reinstate Prince Korko's old status. The woman showed an unfazed smile while Korko was once again fuming inside. He just knew that the petty woman was enjoying this. Then what about my courtyard? I noticed that someone gave it away. Unfortunately, Prince Korko's Raven Yard was reclaimed after Prince's death had been confirmed. At this moment, important guests reside within, so it cannot be returned. Prince is, however, free to choose another unoccupied yard for his own use. Another official threw himself into the line of fire and answered for Spuria. Right. Guess that also goes for all the books, servants, and all round valuables I had in the place. If Prince wishes to reclaim anything he believes was taken unlawfully, he is free to call on the ancestral hall and challenge their decision. Again he understood what he had hated about the courts. This nameless servant knew as well as anyone that he couldn't possibly offend the ancestral hall, not until he had been nominated as emperor by them. So, then Korko. Please tell mother exactly what happened yesterday. If it wasn't Amautu, who was the bold attacker who would hurt you, child? Korko felt like strangling the shameless hag who kept calling herself his mother, but he knew that it would ruin his chances at the throne, so with as much calm and falsehood as he could muster, he gave his prepared answer. In truth, I was lucky. The storm had blown open my window and thus woke me up. As I got up to close it again, a robed attacker stormed into my room. His sword grazed my arm, but I managed to hold on to him and pushed him out of the window on the slippery wooden boards. As he held on to the windowsill, I quickly rushed out of my room to find the 2 guards missing. I immediately made my way down the stairs and spent the rest of the evening tending to my wounds in my attendants' quarters. That is all, the woman probed again, now a frown on her face. Korko knew that this wasn't the answer she was looking for. With how frustrated he had been ever since he had returned home, he thought it was only fair to share his feelings and give some back to his family. That's all I know at least, he answered with a careless shrug. Prince did not see who the attacker might have been. That's what all I know means, yes. The attacker was masked, after all. For the moment, Korko had decided to give away as little information as possible. Until he had a firm grasp on the new distribution of power within Arguna, he didn't want to give any side too much of an advantage on accident. In that case, this would be all for the moment. Empress Mother Spuria got up to declare the end of court deliberations, but Korko interrupted her plans one last time. I would like to visit my father today. I have not seen him in 7 years after all, and it's only proper. Surely the small court can grant the right for a son to visit his father. The Empress Mother did not sit down again. Accompanied by a cold glare in Korko's direction, the woman waved her hand, as if to swat away an annoying fly. Prince Korko is free to enter the royal tomb as he pleases. Mother will provide you with a guide. Not necessary. Prime Minister Chowpik has already offered himself up yesterday. Then so be it. The court is dismissed. With a glance of suspicion towards the smiling man to her right, the Empress Mother ended the meeting. She picked up her fan and then disappeared into the back rooms of the court with short, measured steps. Considering her usual self, she had shown surprising restraint. Korko was certain that away from prying eyes, her fan had already been ruined in her enraged hands. Chapter 47 Into the Darkness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Once the small court had restored Korko's status as prince, he could bring his personal guards through the walls at last. Even better, he was able to make proper plans for the day. First, Fidelio would go out into the inner city to visit his father, the dead emperor's great general Atak, to get the testimony of someone they could believe for a change. He would also inform their allies in the traditionalist camp outside the city on what had happened the previous night. Meanwhile, the crown prince made himself ready to worship his dead father. He cleansed his body in the baths, meditated for an hour, put on the blue funeral tunic and robes he had bought back in Porcero and wore as many silver trinkets as his fashion sense could stomach. With this, he was ready to face his maker. He made his guards carry his effects, including the small bamboo tube of water from the Celestial Mountain, and met up with the Prime Minister. When he exited his temporary quarters, the old politician stood at the entrance, ready and waiting. After a short, cold greeting they went on their way towards the Moonlight Ziggurat. Though the ziggurat was the political center of Medalla, the structure was much older than the empire itself. As far as Korko knew, it had sat in its place for as long as anyone could remember. In all that time, it had always been the center of the northern island of Sinche, no matter who had claimed power over it. Korko marched up the square stone stairs and looked over to the rounded edges to his side. Apart from the stairs in the center, the ancient stone slabs had been rounded on the outside and then neatly fit together to create the enormous building which resembled a beehive in shape. Prince Korko. The Prime Minister was eager to start a conversation, but Korko interrupted the incoming excuse. He wasn't interested in a conversation with the snake. The paths should have carried last night's water well. What do you think, old man? A look down beside his feet revealed the grooves which were carved into the top of each individual slab, the only change the Pluritak dynasty had made to the ziggurat after they had taken control of it some 600 years earlier. As part of the stars and water worship of the Pasha faith, the grooves were meant to catch and guide rain, like they had done during last night's storm. Once the procession had traveled halfway up the stairs, they stepped onto the slabs and continued along the ziggurat side. Any further up and they would reach the Great Court, the Ancestral Hall and eventually the Peak's Pasha Shrine, so they had to make a detour to reach the imperial tomb in the back of the structure. Around halfway along their path, Prime Minister Chowpik made a second attempt at conversation. Prince, if you could. Prime Minister, if you would be so kind. I will soon visit the father I have not seen in 7 years and would like to focus rather than do chit-chat. As they followed the path of the rain, silence once again descended over the two men, even though they had much to say to one another. After his experience from the previous night and the farce in the small court the next morning, Korko had decided that he would rather not speak anywhere within the palace complex, not as long as there was a chance that someone might listen in. Thus, all the sounds they were left with came from their footsteps on the wet stones and from drops of water somewhere in the distance. At last, the group had rounded half the ziggurat and the imperial tomb had come into view. Or rather, the top of the tomb had, since the entire structure was built underground. What was visible to them was an artificial pond of considerable size, which was fed into by the grooves they had followed here. Had it not rained the night before, they could have seen the tomb's enormous, bowl-shaped roof. In comparison to the impressive water feature, the entrance itself was only a square hole in the ground, barred off with heavy iron chains. Usually, the only reason anyone would notice the entrance at all were the always present guards in its front. However, at the moment they were accompanied by their guide through the tomb. The Pachayana, the old head priest of the Pasha faith. Unlike the usual bluish-gray robes of the priests, the Pachayana wore cobalt robes covered in stars above his waist and covered in waves below it. However, like most of his fellow priests, he was also very thin, had a shorn head and carried a large, empty clay pot on his back. Pachayana. This mortal seeks entry to the land of the dead to meet his ancestor. After he had arrived in front of the old priest, Korko gave a deferential gesture. The old man replied in kind. Good, this priest will guide Prince on his journey. After he had spoken, the priest unlocked the chains over the tomb's entrance and led them down the revealed steps. Since they would have to wait outside, Korko took the blessed water back from his Arcavian guards. Although he had almost died the night prior, Korko still wouldn't be allowed to take his warriors into the tomb. After all, even though he was his father's old servant, it was already considered unusual to let Prime Minister Chowpik follow along. Thus, both Korko and Chowpik were led down into the darkness. As the prince left the light of day behind, so did he his protection. However, he was not worried about any more tricks. The tomb was usually closed off and no one should be inside. The only priest allowed into the royal tomb was the Pachayana himself, and he would never give up his privileges. As for the possibility that the head priest might collude with Spuria or his brothers to let in an assassin. As a place of the dead, the royal tomb was already considered a part of the underworld. No mortal would come to enter the tomb for fear that any evil spirits like the immortal sea snake Hatton Supra would trick them and eat their souls. The only way to enter a Pasha tomb and be safe would be in the company of a Pasha priest. How often have people been visiting my father? Korko asked the Pachayana. Since the funerary rites, Emperor Titu has not received any visitors beyond his father. Elder Caelestis has so far visited once every few days to speak with his son. What about the rest? His concubine? His sons? Korko asked in disbelief. How could these people be so shameless and not even keep up appearances? Unfortunately, it seems the living have no use for the wisdom of the dead. As the priest kept lighting lamps on their way and led them deeper and deeper into the damp catacombs, Korko's mood sank with their position underground. While his breathing grew heavy from the musty air, he observed the figures which the priests had carved into the stone walls over the centuries. The common motif was the deep sea. Whales, algae, sea snakes, turtles. And waves, of course. Waves everywhere. According to the Pasha faithful, after death the spirit would have to leave the body and move downward through the deep sea, to reach the afterlife among the stars, so the choice of imagery was not surprising. It was also the reason emperors were buried at such a depth. To give them a shorter journey. In all possible ways, the emperor's way through the depths of the sea were made as easy as possible. Their bodies would be covered in a sweet rice paste, as the journey would last so long as there was still meat on the bones of the deceased. Finally, 12 turtles, considered to be mystical guides to the afterlife, would be sacrificed as companions during the funeral. This rituals also made turtle figurines a popular present during lesser noble funerals, the idols meant to support the dead on their path ahead. After they had lost sight of the world of the living and Korko was sure that no one would overhear them from the outside, he turned his head to the Prime Minister. However, the old man had already been eager before and so he was the first to speak up, his voice enhanced by the eerie echo from the green stones all around them. This servant would like to thank Prince Korko for his support in front of the court this morning. The court? Who would that be? Korko threw back a sarcastic reply. After all, Chowpik himself had been a key member of the small and grand courts for decades. He had already served under Korko's great-grandfather and still did so today, after his father had died. Empress Mother Spuria, of course. Chowpik's eternally frozen smile seemed a bit weary this time, though Korko couldn't know if the man was just acting out a different role from his usual one. Is that so? The prince thus shot back in a flat voice. Yes. 2 months after the emperor's unfortunate death, Lady Achilia managed to convince the ancestors to declare her empress mother. Well, she's not my mother. Korko stopped and turned to face the man, baffled. How could any of this possibly happen? The head priest, meanwhile, waited several steps ahead to give the two opponents some space. At the time, Prince Korko's warrior, a man named Quirinu, had returned to the capital and brought tale of Prince's demise. Since the crown prince was considered dead and both remaining princes were Lady Achilia's children. I get it, it doesn't matter since she'd be the emperor's mother soon. But why give her the title early? What was her excuse? Stabilize the royal family. Prince Korko is wise, flattered the politician. Doesn't take a genius to understand a simple power grab. Korko would never believe that Spuria, a woman he only knew as selfish, vicious and choleric, would act out of anything other than self-interest. In response to the prince's bile, the politician bobbed his head up and down in an exaggerated manner. By now, the Empress Mother has installed her men all throughout Pluritak Castle and is in complete control of the small court. Only a raised eyebrow and a dry look answered Chowpik's complaint. Korko doubted that the old politician wouldn't also have some pieces left in play, not after decades of preparation. Thus, this old servant hopes Prince can understand that it was not his will to leave Prince's guards outside the castle walls. The accommodations as well had already been prepared and instructions sent from inside the Empress Mother's golden yard. So you're implying that Spuria is the one who wanted me dead? Korko asked back in a flat tone. In reaction, the politician looked shocked, though Korko was certain that Chowpik's current inner state couldn't be further from surprise. Oh, no. This old servant would not dare. Just that, since the emperor's death, the Empress Mother has done much to guarantee Prince Pachakutek's ascension to the silver throne. Surely it would pain her to see all her hard work wasted. For now, Korko decided that he had humored the politician for long enough. No longer would he follow the man's breadcrumbs through their conversation. Instead, now that he had privacy, someone in the know and a reliable witness within earshot all at once, the prince decided that it would be best if he got answers to some of his more pressing questions. Now that we're talking about the emperor's death, how did my father die exactly? I am surprised that prince would not know, Chow Pik asked, another mask of shock on his face. I have asked around, but I've only heard natural causes. But when has a pluritak ever died naturally at the age of 60? Now the politician looked embittered, as if he had bitten into a lemon. Korko still didn't buy it. Truth be told, this servant is not entirely sure himself. Some time after Prince Amaudu's return to the capital, the emperor decided to close himself off within the Moonlight Ziggurat. At that time, the only ones with access to him were the elders of the ancestral hall, the empress mother, the princes, and some close personal servants. Even his decrees to the courts would only come through his warriors. He seemed unwilling or unable to attend the court deliberations in person. So you're saying that no one can tell me what happened to my father? Some do, but unfortunately, this old servant can only offer rumors. After he had spent some time in isolation, the emperor brought doctors into the ziggurat, so word has it that Emperor Tita was ill. When he heard the news, Prince Amaudu sent word back to the Chukwa Empire to bring the best doctor he could find over the Verdoic Sea. Alas, it was to no avail, and the emperor went on his final journey soon thereafter. Is that so? Korko asked with the enthusiasm of a sedated sloth. Just because of an owed debt and some privacy, he had been stupid enough to believe that the old politician would tell him the truth. Prince should not doubt all that he hears. Truth is everywhere, though we cannot always see it. Out of nowhere, the old priest chimed in. As they had descended further and further down towards the center of the old tomb, the Pachayana was building a trail of light behind them. In his duties, the man had acted in such silence and surety that both of his wards had forgotten about his existence. Now that he was reminded, rather than get fooled by Chow Pik some more, Korko asked the priest something he had been curious about for a while. Pachayana, on my road here I have been to Mount Urkana. The Grand Seer there told me about that celestial prophecy. I wonder what Pachayana thinks about it. If a man looks down the mountains, he cannot see his brother at the bottom, no matter how good his eyes. How far from us must the stars be, compared to the height of a mountain? Accompanied by his strange sing-song voice, the priest stared by at the musky ceiling, or maybe past it, up to the stars. So you think that our suffering won't matter in the grand scheme of things? What if I said that I can make a man see down a mountain as clearly as if he stood at its foot? Korko replied with a smile. Lenses sure were neat. It seems Prince has already found his path and will not need further guidance. Fortune might favor us yet. The old priest's wrinkles stretched back around his face to reveal a mysterious smile. Korko, on the other hand, was sure that the priest had misunderstood his joke. Silence fell over the group as everyone's thoughts sank into their own pits. After they had been left alone with the echo of their steps for a while, they had reached the lowest chamber of the pyramid, the gateway to the afterlife. In here, the dead would be barred up after their funerals, until only bones were left. Chapter 48, a chat between father and son. You are listening at novelfull.audio. To help them on their way, the bodies of dead Pasha faithful would be covered in a wet cloth and barred up in enclosed rooms. It was only during this time that ordinary people could still communicate with them. At least that was what the Pasha priest said. So long as the deceased were still on their way through the underworld, it was possible to establish a connection. Family members would sound gongs for them to hear, so they could find their way back for a short chat. Rich or bereaved would also wear silver to create a glitter for their dead relatives to see from distance. Once their bodies had decomposed and only bones were left, they had made their way through the underworld and reached the afterlife among the stars. Eons later, their souls would be cleansed of their impurities and descend back to earth in the form of life-giving rain, the life which had been lost to death would return to the earth. The priests would carry around large jars to catch these rains and use them in their rituals. Consequently, the harshest punishment known in Medalla was the salting, where criminals would be buried alive in salt, their bodies preserved to never decompose and their spirits cursed to never find peace. Before he went to meet his dead father, the head priest purified Korko one final time with the rain water from his back. Then the prince had to go ahead by himself. Conversations with the dead were always a private affair. Not even the priest's cult listen in. That's right, the Grand Seer also said my father was struggling on his journey, Korko said to the head priest with a look over his shoulder. I will pray to the stars for the Emperor's safe passage. I appreciate that. And I am sure my father will as well. The old priest just smiled again as he saw the prince off. In preparation for his visit, Korko had taken an oil lamp from the priest in his right hand and the bamboo tube of celestial water in his injured left. With gravitas, he used his good shoulder to push open the stone slabs over the entrance. They were inscribed with all manner of symbols, but he could not read their purpose in the flicker of the lamp. After Korko had passed the gate, the Patriana pulled it closed from the outside, a surprising show of strength. During their exchange, the relatives should never disturbed. Korko stepped into the dark, musty room and looked down at the dim lamp. In fact, he was convinced that those evil spirits who kept claiming people in the royal tomb were carbon monoxide, with how many lamps the old priest had lit on their way. Still, the old tomb was an impressive construction to even allow breathable air this far down, and without getting flooded by the basin of water above. Even after he focused his eyes into the distance, he made out only contours. Thus, he placed the oil lamp in a socket by the door. The polished bronze mirror behind the socket spread the lamp's light to illuminate the mortuary. The emperor's place of rest was a damp, round room with few decorations, Spartan for a ruler's grave. Maybe because the Yaku believed that their journey through the underworld was spiritual, they would not think of bringing anything with them. The only objects in the room were the stone altars in the center, 5 in total, ornate with the symbols of the Pasha priests, and a few smaller objects of worship in front of them to facilitate conversation. Finally, on top of the central altar lay the corpse of Medalla's emperor, Titicaelestis Pluritac, wrapped up in a luxurious blue shroud emblazoned with the family insignia. A feeling of incongruity overcame Korko, as if something was not quite as it should. Indeed, he had stepped into a different world. With great decorum, the prince marched until he reached 6 steps away from the grave. He kneeled on one of the prayer mats which had been prepared there. After he had taken the small mallet in his front, he closed his eyes and started to hit a matching gong with great sincerity, for it would guide the spirit of the dead back to the land of the living. After several minutes of meditation, Korko opened his eyes, put down the mallet and began to talk. Hey Dad. I'm late. I really couldn't make it any sooner. I tried to. He paused for a while, his head lowered. Then he realized what he was doing. Whether his father could hear him or not, there was no point lying to a dead man. He corrected his posture as he corrected himself. No, that's bullshit. Listen Dad, here's the truth. I hated you. I really did, for a long time. You didn't protect your wife when you should have. You didn't protect me, your own flesh and blood. Your heir. Always distant and always cold. You sent me away overseas, to some foreign, unknown place on some flimsy excuse. Everyone knew it was one as well. And I was convinced that it was your way of getting rid of the nuisance. The weak one. The gloomy one. The choleric one. You shouldn't have been surprised at that, really. Things didn't go so well in Arcavia, you know. Go to some royal university to learn more about the ways of the foreigners. A letter of introduction to guarantee my admission. Rejected at the doorstep. No entry for non-believers, they said. The letter was probably fake as well. All those servants you sent with me disappeared at the first sign of trouble. Well, Fidelio stuck around at least. And a Tao, but they don't count. Nothing went well. As if the whole world had conspired against me. But then, do you know what happened? A miracle. And I was saved. And I saw what could be done. What I could do. I cut my hair and powdered my skin to look like everyone else, and I started to succeed where I had failed before. Started to create something. To take back what I should have never lost in the first place. So I could come back and show you how wrong you were to throw us away. Though. After years of doing that. I get it now. Being responsible for others, weighed down like that, it's tough. Every day. And now that I'm back in the palace. I can see it, the crap you were up against to preserve the peace, preserve your legacy. At least somewhat, you probably wanted to protect me when you sent me off. I get that, at least. Intellectually. People always say a son should love his father. I still don't know if I can do that. After what happened, after I gained all those memories, I don't even know if I'm your son anymore, or some foreign traveler from a different world, or both, or neither. Corco took a deep breath to calm himself before he continued. I still catch myself blaming you for every little thing that goes wrong in my life, but at least I can respect you now. For all the things you tried to do and all the sacrifices you made for me, for Mom and for your people. Which is why I can tell you now, Corco raised his body as he raised his voice. I will protect your legacy, but not for you. I will do it for our people. And for myself. I will make sure to take the throne. To defend it from those who only see gold and power. And I will offer up myself and everything I hold dear to unite North and South, to create a paradise, a nation where no one has to starve or freeze. Where everyone is equal, truly equal. Where greatness awaits those capable of greatness, independent of their birth. The greatest, freest, richest, most powerful, most artistic, most learned, most spiritual country in the world. After he had said it out loud, Corco caught his pathos and felt silly for screaming into an empty room. Even so, he continued in a lowered voice, just in case. I might not be back after this. So for now, I will say goodbye until we meet on the other side. Let the celestial water guide you to the stars. Thus, Corco was ready to finish his visit. He opened the bamboo and trickled the water over the emperor's bones. Below him the shroud sank down from the weight of the water, to contour his dead father's skull. It made him aware that one day, he would lie there just the same. However, before he could reflect on his ambitions or their worth, he noticed something strange. For a few seconds he stared at the wet cloth, before he went back to the entrance and brought his lamp for better lighting. Something was off. Something was not right. As soon as his mind grasped at the notion, it caught onto something else. That strangeness he had felt ever since he entered the mortuary. He had not in fact been overwhelmed by the mystic atmosphere. His brain had been missing something from the room, but his mind hadn't noticed. Now he understood. The room smelled of nothing, there was no stench from the rotting corpse. Even if most of the emperor's flesh would be decomposed after 6 months, there was no way for the smell to escape from a sealed room. Determined to find the truth, Corco grabbed the shroud, ripped it off and was confronted with a sight of horror. There lay the last emperor of Medalla, first of the Yaku people, encased entirely in wax. Something inside Corco snapped. He drew his hidden dagger and chipped off some of his father's waxen prison. Exposed beneath was dry, leathery skin. Asterisk salted. Mummified. Preserved for all eternity, asterisk that he couldn't even remember what happened next. By the time he regained his senses, Prime Minister Chowpik stared up at him in terror, pressed into the wall with Corco's injured hand. The only reason the politician was still alive was the Pachayana, who held on to Corco's good arm with all his strength and prevented the dagger's plunge straight into the helpless minister's neck. Young prince. You are bleeding. It is time to stop. Korko looked from the futile and desperate struggles of Chowpik onto his left arm. Some of his stitches had come undone, as he could see a wet spot form on his shoulder. Even so, Korko ignored the wound and still held on. A little blood was no reason to stop now. Young faithful. This is no place for violence, the old priest said. The spirits will awaken. As Korko gulped in the thick underground air, clouds spun in front of his eyes. He took a slow, shallow breath to calm his pulse and followed the old priest's grip, away from the object of his rage. However, he never took his eyes off the politician. Before you call for peace you should look inside first, priest. Look at what they did to my father. Then tell me again that it's no place for violence. The Pachayana seemed confident enough that Korko had himself under control again, since he entered the mortuary without another word. Meanwhile, the old prime minister couldn't even struggle to his feet before Korko twisted the man's arm behind his back and pushed him after the priest, through the opened gate. At the sight of the emperor's corpse, the prince could feel Chopik's body stiffen in his grasp. What is this? What happened? The minister's voice was shrill, but Korko still tightened his grip. To me, it looks like the body was dried out, mummified and then encased in wax to preserve it. What the fuck do you think happened here, huh? You hypocrite piece of shit. Eternal damnation. Even the always serene Pachayana was petrified as he mumbled to himself. Now then, old man. I've looked past your bullshit so far because I'm nice like that, but one more lie out of your mouth and I'll drill you a more honest one closer to your lungs. You understand? Unlike before, Chopik's body deflated. For once, the old man looked his age. Whatever Prince Korko desires. So who the fuck did this? I truly do not know. It is my first time in the tomb since the emperor's funeral. Unsatisfied at the minister's response, Korko's head shot over to the next suspect. Hey, priest. Speak, how could this happen? I never looked under the cloth. I only ever saw the emperor shrouded. I did not know. The old priest stared at Korko with wide eyes. His wise and serene mask had fallen off long ago. So then who did the shrouding? I need names. Now. I will support Prince's efforts as best I can, the priest replied with a deep bow of deference. And you, politician. Korko shoved Chowpik into the damp wall of the mortuary. Only then did the old minister manage to stop himself and turn around. You'll give me a list of all the people who've visited my father after his isolation. Everyone. And don't tell me you don't know. You were one of father's closest servants. There's no way you were not let inside to see him. I will. Whatever is needed. Even as he answered the prince, Chopik's trembling eyes had not once left the mummified corpse. Chapter 49 A long day of work. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fidelio had a long day ahead of himself. Not only would he have to help furnish of the new Raven Yard, he also had to go visit his father's home in the outer city. After all, they needed allies, if possible reliable ones for a change. No one would be more reliable than Great General Atak. Though first, there was another matter to sort out. Underscore 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 underscore. Yes, honored lady. Prince Korko is deeply grateful for your assistance. Fidelio looked at the thin foreigner girl from the Verdant Isles. Pretty, but not worth the wait, was his evaluation. It had taken him some time just to reach this point. Because of the dead body found close by, the servants around the former Raven Yard had been stricter than usual. Even so, the girl in his front hadn't suffered any hardship. At this point, Fidelio would have been a fool to believe in Korko's weird tale of a combat maid. Rather than a servant, the girl should be someone of high status. Is that a fact? I wonder why your prince would not come and retrieve his things himself then. Unfortunately, Master Korko is currently on a visit to his father, so he could only make the trip later. However, Master Korko found it prudent to assume that honored lady would be relieved of her burden as soon as possible. Thus, this servant was sent. In truth, he would rather not stay longer to figure out the girl's identity, his mind already at the general's mansion, already home. Still, he would have to be patient for now. Prince Korko's belongings, was it? One moment, they have already been prepared. With deft movements, the girl leaned into the room she had covered with her body and retrieved a large cloth bag. Even though she tried to make herself taller, Fidelio could spot the blood stains on the floorboards behind her slim back. "Tell your prince that I would rather he visit someone else next time," she said. Fidelio grabbed the items, offered a deep bow and splendidly ignored the accusation. "Prince Korko is an honored lady's debt," he said before he turned and left. Underscore 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 Prince Korko, this old man still believes that Prince's actions are too drastic. The dead should remain undisturbed. While the Pachayana was proselytizing, Korko looked down on the wax-encased finger segment he had cut off his father's corpse. "Even when he was alive, my father would have been all right without a third of his pinky. Why should it matter now?" The prince's eyes left the finger and stared at the old priest. "How did you miss this anyways? How can a priest not know who he is burying?" He had not even considered it up until now, but his current disagreement with the head priest made him realize that not even the Pachayana should be above mundane problems. The old priest was a suspect as well. Prince should take great care in his thoughts. If Prince begins to suspect anyone without abandon, it may become a habit. Korko still looked at the priest, unsatisfied with the fortune cookie of an answer. Until the old man had explained himself, he wouldn't let up. Prince should be aware of the rites himself. The deceased is prepared by his own personal warriors and then delivered to the priesthood for the ceremony. This old man was only present for the rites themselves, as is tradition. This matter is a shame upon those very rites and traditions, and it is an affront to the great Pasha itself. The Pachayana will clear the path to the afterlife and guarantee Emperor Tidu's safe journey. Prince has my word. So then, who was responsible? Which warriors were doing the preparations? Korko looked to the old politician who was sweating cold rivers even in the musty environment. "Prince, this. Who, you bastard?" Lady Achilia and Prince Amautu were held responsible to prepare the journey. "Wait, what? What about my grandfather? What about Pakakutek?" Elder Caelestis and Prince Pasha were out of the capital when the emperor passed, in search of an old expert medicus who was rumored to travel the mountains. Unfortunately, they came too late. And Amautu? How could one prince charge through the lands and show off his filial piety while the other simply waited at home? Korko doubted his brother would be this content, not with how ambitious he had shown himself to be the previous night. Second prince trusted his Chutwa doctor and believed that no Yaku could ever exceed him. So he stayed at home. Because he had no respect for the Yaku rites and traditions, Korko added in his head. He hoped his brother's infatuation with the West hadn't gone too far. Underscore 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 out of the palace gate and down the stairs, Fidelio reached the inner city. In his attempts to prepare the new courtyard, he had been maddened by the servants of the royal castle for a while, but had soon abandoned his work. After what had happened last night and this morning, he doubted Korko would want to spend much time in the palace. Thus, it had become important to secure other accommodations, another excuse to visit home. As he walked down the old familiar path, he thought back to his family. His father Atak was a fair man, but harsh. Even for his own child he would not make exceptions, as one would expect of the head general of the empire. Fidelio had always suffered under his father's draconic training. However, after such a long time had passed, he remembered the days out in his home's training yard with fondness. Even all the blood and sweat of years past did nothing to deter him. Though there would be no corresponding tears. Tears were not allowed with the general. Of course, wails and complaints had been fine with his mother, who would chide the great general whenever he had overburdened his only son with his expectations. As his sisters had grown, they had sided with mother and had done their best to get exemptions for their big brother. They would beg for Fidelio to get longer breaks or easier training sessions, until the general would get annoyed and chase them away. He hadn't seen home in 7 years, but unlike Corco or Atau, he had never felt like an exile. Since General Atak had been the emperor's closest confidant, they had received a treatment beyond many of the great nobles of Medalla. As the general's only son and heir, Fidelio had always been close to the crown prince as a result. From an early age, he had known that he would become the next emperor's attendant, and he had been educated as such. While Corco might have been bitter about Emperor Tidu's decision to send him away, Fidelio's presence alone should have clued him into just how much the emperor had expected of the young prince. Unfortunately, now there was no way for Emperor Tidu to tell his true feelings to his son anymore. Fidelio hoped that his friend would come to terms by himself. Maybe in death, Tidu could provide answers to his son. Underscore 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 underscore. At this point, Corco couldn't trust either of his witnesses, but bad information was still better than no information at all. What about the servants? There's no way anyone truly loyal to father would have agreed to this sort of burial, Corco said to the Prime Minister. As I understand it, none of Emperor Tidu's close servants were involved. Corco was about to blow up again, but the politician raised his hand to preempt the eruption. However, this choice was based on the emperor's personal instructions before his death. Bullshit. It seems possible, from the rumors of the palace, the priest said. The emperor was not right of mind. Sometimes, it felt as if an evil spirit had entered his body. That was the reason he locked himself away. To make sure no one could make use of his weakness, the politician added. Are you saying that my father was crazy? Corco stared down Chowpik, whose forehead's floodgates opened even more in response. With the son's current appearance, the actions of the father do not seem unlikely, the Pachayana said from the side. Corco realized that he had been far too touchy. While it was easy to see why he would be, it wouldn't help to confront anyone and anything in his path. The Prime Minister had been a lot more helpful than he had expected, after all. While he took a few breaths to try and calm down, Chowpik continued his tale. The Emperor had been forgetful for a while. He once called Prince Pasha by Prince Corco's name. Later, he began to see things others could not. Ghosts and spirits, some servants said. Yet Emperor Tidu still persisted in his work. This old servant was fortunate to see the emperor in his great persistence and helped as much as possible. After a meeting between the emperor and his closer servants, he decided to let some lesser warriors fulfill the rites. And where are his close servants now? I have a few questions for them, Corco asked. As he looked around the dark mortuary, the old man shifted his weight between his feet. Prince Corco should not be upset. Where? His hands shot up as Chowpik took a step back, away from the prince. Then he took a deep breath to prepare for his answer, and for what would come after. After the emperor's passing, the ancestral hall determined that there were many problems during the last days of the emperor's reign. The cause of death itself was suspicious. Thus, some even speculated on poison or a curse. Further, great amounts of wealth had disappeared from the treasury. The ancestors concluded that many of Emperor Tidu's old servants stayed away from the funerary rites because they could not bear the weight of their conscience. Thus, They were punished. What do you mean? What does that mean? Korko's eyes widened as he stepped towards the politician again. Soon though he stopped, so as not to spook the old servant too much. Although he already knew the answer to his question, he still had to hear it. Many were reduced to commoners or slaves. The closest servants were either salted or allowed to commit suicide. Underscore 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 underscore. For a while, Fidelio just stood in front of the old familiar mansion as he soaked in the atmosphere and thought about the past. He was still trying to find the right words for his return, when someone tugged his sleeve and pulled him out of his thoughts. Deepest apologies, young master, but the lord of the house would punish young master if he were to remain here for much longer. With large hazel eyes, a servant girl, or slave, in simple brown robes looked up at him. No need to worry, Fidelio answered with a calm smile, I am the heir of the house. In fact, my arrival should have already been anticipated. But young master, the house has no heir yet. Please do not make things difficult for this servant or the guards will have to step in. The girl moved back half a step and threw a nervous glance at the mansion's entrance, where two watchmen with simple spears stood ready to get involved should the need arise. Fidelio frowned, more out of confusion than out of annoyance. With their shabby equipment and poor posture, those two guards reminded him of the nitwits who had blocked their way back in Porcero. There was no chance the general would allow someone like that to guard his doors. This is not Great General Attaque de Pluritax's mansion, he asked. No lord, it has not been for quite some time now, the girl said as she took another step back. Before Fidelio could process what he had heard, a man in expensive robes laden with silver came out of the house and towards him in great strides. Huh, Fadi, my old friend. What a pleasure to see you again. Fidelio raised his brow at the nickname he hadn't heard in years, ever since they had lost their honor and become merchants in Arcavia. Still, he looked over to the voice and managed to put an old familiar face to the old familiar name. Quirinu de Pluritaque. What is your business at my family's mansion? Despite his disdain for the man in his front, Fidelio managed to keep his voice calm. Quirinu had been one of the warriors under Korko who had crossed the Weltalic Sea with them. He had also been the first to run away once they had met with trouble. What my business is? This is my home, did you not know that? I thought that was why you were here. To talk about old times. Honestly, he grinned, it was quite surprising when I heard that Korko was home. I was convinced that with all the selfish naivete, you and your master had long kicked the bucket. It's a shame, I was so convinced of his demise that I may have made a mistake when I recounted Korko's fate to the court. How unfortunate, losing his title just like that. Well, at least you still have your life, right? With that brutish strength of yours you will make a fine silver miner, I'm sure. As for your father. He moved his head around Fidelio's stony face as he probed for an opening. That one wasn't so lucky. The old man's incompetence caused the emperor's death, that's what has been decided. The fool thought he would save his honor when he cut open his own arms, but after his death, all his achievements were still erased from the imperial records. Now, it is as if there never even was a general attack of the Enlightened Empire. Quirinu paced around Fidelio as the taunt in his voice grew ever clearer. However, one look at his former companion's clenched fists and he increased the distance. The snake wouldn't be willing to die here. As for your mother and your sisters, their wealth was taken and they were degraded to mean commoners. But surely they'll be fine. With how pretty they are, they'll be able to sell themselves on the streets for an excellent price. Unfortunately, I haven't found any of them yet. I have been looking, you know. I could buy their bodies with their own money and have them service me in their own home. Do you want to come inside by the way? I'm sure you will appreciate my refurbishing. No, that won't be necessary. Good day. With stiff movements, Fidelio turned around and left. Underscore 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 underscore. His head in an absolute mess, Fidelio slowly looked down and looked into the crawling stream of water at his feet. In his confusion, he had almost stepped into the river. After he had left his home, he had wandered in a daze, his soul pulled from his body. He couldn't even remember how he had gotten here. First, orient yourself. The lively street around him should be one of the two main roads which lead along the Arga River, which meant he had somehow left the inner city without even realizing. A look up at the sun showed that he had walked for a considerable amount of time, while the same look down showed his hands encrusted in blood, freshly drawn from the crescent-shaped wounds his nails had left in them. Only through pain could he prevent his urges and not rip the head off of that rattling cockroach. He knew it wouldn't help any and would only get them into trouble. In fact, that might have been the whole idea behind the provocation. Good sir. A figure dressed in a robe, black and covered in stars, talked to him from the entrance of a small tent. Do you wish to have your fortune read? The master sees greatness in your future and invites you inside. I don't believe in wasting money, he answered with a frown. Rather than worry about the scammers here, he had to go back to the palace and make an urgent report. He also had to plan for his revenge, just another point on the list. However, the owner of the tent wouldn't let up. From inside, beyond the first robed figure, came another voice. Fidelio di Pluritac. This one reading is for free. In response, Fidelio raised a brow, looked around and went towards the tent. Chapter 50 Making Plans. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Do you mean to say that we have left the entire capital in the hands of the Furia? Sonko's nickname for the new empress mother tickled a grin out of the frustrated Corco. It seemed like the estates had kept the rumor mill going after his departure. Although he really wanted to ask for details, work came before play. Thus, Corco addressed the more serious part of his uncle's claim first. No, the Achilia clan only controls the small court. The grand court can't be in session without an emperor anyways. And there's no way the Achilia clan will take control of the entire ancestral hall. The small court on the other hand. That one they already own. After he had come back from the tomb, he had sent a messenger to call his uncle into the city walls. Meanwhile, he had tried to make progress on his would-be assassins. First he had looked for his original main suspects. The master of the armory and the head of the Imperial Guard. However, since the morning session of the small court, both of them had committed suicide, to no one's surprise. When he arrived at their mansions, Spuria's men stood ready to plead leniency for the families of the suspects. Even the corpse of the unfortunate guard Corco had killed in the Raven Yard had disappeared without a trace. In general, a string of coincidences came together to hinder any investigation. The mere thought of that woman's stranglehold on his family's palace was enough to suffocate Corco as well. After he had run his head against the same wall one too many times, he realized how pointless it was to leave the home advantage to Spuria. Thus, he had left the palace to meet up with his allies at the Sicarda clan's mansion in the inner city. At the moment Corco, Sonko and Primus sat around a small table in a private room. They had to forge a proper plan. At the same time, Corco had tasked the Prime Minister to get them access to the Empire's treasury. If he wanted to find out the truth, he would have to go through their books and see if the accusations of embezzlement against the Emperor's former warriors held any water. Achilia clan. Prince Corco, you mean that more than just Lady Achilia are involved? A shocked Primus asked from the side. It would be impossible for that woman to take control of the entire palace by herself. Not within half a year and not against the will of princes and Prime Minister. I'm sorry boy. I would have never let you go had I known that it was already this bad inside. Sonko turned to his nephew with a frown. It's not that bad, Corco answered, accompanied by a wave of his hand. we forced all the actors on stage sooner than they might have liked, so I'd say my palace sleepover was a decent success. Gaping wound notwithstanding. With his head, Corco gestured to his injured arm. Primus, meanwhile, tried his best to follow the conversation. Prince Corco, who are those actors you forced on stage? The Achilia clan and Prince Amautu. Yeah. Prime Minister Chowpik is also a bit of an unknown, Corco added. The Prime Minister. Prince mentioned that he seemed shaken when he saw the Emperor's remains. He did. He seemed shaken. The man's an advisor though, which makes him a politician. All decent politicians are great actors. It's their primary function. Prince Corco, I believe we should not judge so harshly. Surely, most advisors would be true to their lords. They were appointed by the lords after all. If they were treacherous, they would not reach their position, or not hold it for long. Since Primus had lived under the rules of the clans all his life, it was no wonder he would have no practical knowledge on governance. To the Eastern lords, even their own warriors were little more than tools. No wonder the young noble could not fathom one of them ever being disloyal. So what exactly do you think an advisor does? What are his priorities? The teacher asked his student. Of course his priorities lie with his lord. He ought to support the lord's rule to the best of his ability. How could it be anything else? At first, Primus rattled off his memorized knowledge with confidence, but a look over to the smiles on Corco and Sanko's faces and his voice began to falter. By the end, he was mumbling to himself. Since the kid seemed lost, Corco decided to help him out a bit. An advisor's priority, first and foremost, is to make his master think that anything the advisor does is for the master's own good, no matter what it is. His second priority is to make his master believe that whatever the advisor does, no one else could do. Third, he needs to explain why every success was thanks to his advice and any failure in spite of it. Those are his priorities and nothing else. That's how an advisor gets his position and that's how he holds it. Anyone who lacks in these three skills will see himself replaced by a more gifted liar. Never trust a politician, remember that. It'll get you far in life. Although Sanko looked amused by Primus' slack face, he left the kid with his thought. Instead, he moved the conversation back into the proper tracks. So you believe Chowpik committed those monstrosities on your father? I didn't say that. I'm pretty sure he wasn't involved in the mummification. That does not mean he wouldn't be involved in the assassination though. Mine or my father's. That is, if my father was in fact killed. As he recounted the evidence in his head, Corco realized just how little he knew about the capital's machinations. Then why would the Furia try to cover for Chowpik and remove evidence from the palace? Surely she made an enemy out of the Prime Minister when she tried to sacrifice him in the court today. Sanko asked. Chances are the two worked together before, so she threw him under the bus to cover her own tracks. This way, she can also make sure she doesn't lose any pawns in the palace. And what about Prince Amautu? Not him. At least not for my assassination. I saw my attacker. Red hair. Pale skin. Angular features. The only Easterners Amautu should have access to should be the people of that Albert Kalas. Kalas is from a kingdom called Borna. The Bornish don't have red hair. Now, I know that because I spent a good few years over there. On the other hand, there's no way Spuria would know. I'd guess that all foreigners look the same to her. His lips pursed in determination, Primus returned to life as he jumped up from his chair. Then we know who did the deed. We must call an assembly of the lords and let that she-devil and nasty servant taste justice. Post haste. With his usual calm, Sanko put his giant hand on Primus' shoulder and pressed him back into his seat. Calm, kid. Once you succeed your father's estate, calm will be your most important skill. This one would do well to remember that too. He pointed at Corco, who ignored the jab at his moody personality. Much rather than talk about his flaws, the prince wanted to show off his deductive skills. Since there's no concrete evidence, we can't punish Spuria, or Chowpick. Without evidence, there's really nothing we can do. With some luck, we'll end up finding the assassin's body before anyone else does. Until then, it's enough that we know who our enemies are. I don't care much about myself anyways. What I'd much rather do is find the monster who robbed my father of his rest. It seems you have thought everything out, so you must have a suspect for this as well. Ichilia again. Sanko probed. That woman does not have a reason to do this to my dad. She did love him after all, at least as far as I can tell, and has given him 3 children. She had plenty of opportunity, but I just can't find a motive. Amautu on the other hand. With a frown, Korko looked down on his hands. I'm not sure just how obsessed he is with that scholastic drivel, but if he is brainwashed enough, I could absolutely see him spitting on Yaku traditions just to prove his dedication. I just hope my brother isn't that far gone yet. And your father's warriors. That's an obvious sham. I'm not even gonna consider that General Atak would betray father. I'd rather not ask, but... For a moment, Sanko halted. Elder Caelestis. According to the head priest, the former Emperor Caelestis Pluritak had paid regular visits to his son before and after Tida's death. It seemed hard to avoid suspicion for him. All this time, Lord Sakartu had avoided this topic. He would know that Korko wasn't willing to consider this and as a result treaded as lightly as he could. He still stepped on a landmine. Bullshit. Korko shouted, as his fist landed on the table. My grandfather has always been fair and earnest towards every member of the family, even me. And he's always been close to his son. Close to everybody. In that entire fucked up family, he was always the normal one, the calm eye in that fucking storm of a palace. If I can't even trust him anymore, then who would I trust? Sanko saw Korko's agitation and allowed himself a sigh. If his nephew wanted to secure the throne, his outbursts were the biggest problem. However, now was not the time to breach the subject. His nephew was still young. If he had flaws or blind spots, Sanko just had to make up the difference. I apologize. I only tried to consider all possibilities. And I never liked the man, you know. Once he realized what he had done, Korko calmed down right away. His temper had gotten the better of him again. There really wasn't any reason to attack his uncle just for being thorough. You don't like anyone north of the Narrow Sea, uncle, he said with a gloomy smile. As far as evidence on the culprits of the mummification goes, Korko grabbed into a large bag behind himself and pulled out several pieces of paper, which were covered in mysterious markings. While I was down in the grave I made sure to get fingerprints from father's body. Fingerprints. As far as the crown prince was concerned, Primus once again asked all the right questions. He started to wonder how he had ever lived without someone as convenient as him around. A method to identify who touched my father's body after his mummification. With a confident smile, he pointed at the papers covered in fingerprints. Each of these prints are from a different person, and they're unique for anyone in the world. Most of these prints will be from the dead servants, but there's a good chance at least one of them will betray the conspirators. Now all I need to do is find an excuse to collect fingerprints from anyone suspicious. There's also a few other tests I want to do, but I will need the right equipment first. It'd be best if I had Ronnie around, but at the very least, we'll have to wait until Fidelio is back to go down that path. Speaking of which, where is that dim attendant of yours? Sanko grinned. Korko ignored his uncle's evaluation of the warrior. Now that he was reminded, he was too concerned to care about a little joke. Fidelio has been out for a while now. I've sent people to inform him of what happened to his father, but I'm afraid it's already too late. If nothing else, he should be able to stay out of trouble if someone targets him. The man is far more capable than any of you might imagine. With a wave of his hand, Sanko dismissed Korko's concern. You best prepare well for tomorrow's banquet, my boy. I can guarantee you, the Furia will try her best to make you look as foolish as possible in front of the estates. Which is the entire point of the charade, I guess. Tomorrow, I'll have to try and attack back. That woman will only get more and more brash if I can't get a proper hit in soon. Although the prince was eager to discuss potential counter-measures for the banquet, they were interrupted by a knock on the door. After Sanko's affirmation, a servant of House Sakartu entered the room and announced Fidelio's return. When Korko saw his attendant, his relieved face stiffened once again. With a stiff body and ashen face pointed at the ground, the warrior didn't seem in good spirits. Master Korko, it seems General Atak will not be able to offer any support. His trembling hands were clenched, the dried blood still visible between the fingers. I heard, the prince answered in a grave voice, while he touched his friend's shoulder. We'll make all of them fry for their crimes, but not now. We all have to calm down first and avoid mistakes. Tomorrow, I need you in the camp in case there is a challenge. I'll be taking Primus with me as my attendant. Although his reasoning was sound, in truth, he wanted Fidelio out of the spotlight for a while. The prince could afford to be rude, but for an ordinary warrior, a defiant glare towards a lord could spell his death. Yes, master. Fidelio looked into Korko's eyes, as his face firmed and his hands eased. So where have you been? We were already worried another assassin had gotten to you. For a moment, Fidelio considered his words. After I heard about the general, I wasn't feeling too well. I wandered the outer city for a while, to clear my head. Again Korko sighed. Their return to Medalla had been far less glamorous than he had envisioned. By now, all of them had received some wounds, physical and otherwise. We should all get some rest and work through what happened today. Uncle Sanko, if it's alright with you, I'll be staying here for now. I'll be damned if I'm dumb enough to trust the palace one more time. But Prince, would the lords not say that Prince is not man enough to face his fears in the palace? Primus asked. Fuck em. I hope the rumor spreads. If even an imperial prince has to be afraid of the palace, the one in charge of the small court is not doing her job correctly. We should hope Spuria is dumb enough to make such a simple mistake. It'll make all our lives much easier. Underscore 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 underscore, you failed. So what should I have done then? Believe me, I couldn't have been nastier if I tried, but that guy didn't budge an inch. From what I heard, he looked close to breaking. Rather than worry about us, you seem more afraid of the brute's retaliation. Who dares? Who did you hear that from? From your servants, of course. You didn't think they were really your servants, did you? How dare? You forget your place, servant. My master gave you all you have today. It would be just as easy to take it all away. No. Honored lord, this slave wouldn't dare. Good. You look much better down there, groveling like that. If you want to make up for your mistake, you best try a bit harder. Tomorrow is your last chance. If what you said is true, it should be easy for you to ruin Prince Korko's reputation. It's him or you, don't forget that. Of course, honored master. This servant will obey. Underscore 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 underscore. What were you thinking? You tired to kill a prince of Pluritak. So you would not wish to help your son climb the throne then? If the prince died to a foreigner assassin, we could blame them and make sure they don't get a foothold on Yakwalpa. Once we hold the silver throne, we are free to do as we wish. Was that not what you wanted? No matter what, this was too risky. You knew I would not agree to this, that was why you planned the deed in secret. Stars be blinded, you tried to kill imperial blood. No need to worry, there will be no more attempts on his life. Prince Korko won't have a claim left after tomorrow anyways. House Achilia will make sure of that. Underscore 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 underscore. Our position now is almost too good to be true. Divide and conquer. Yes, it has been going quite well, hasn't it, old man? As the princes fight for the crown, we can spread ourselves in the crevices all we want. Hollow out the emperor's title and give the empty shell back to the most obedient candidate. You have spread like weeds. Be mindful of your greed. It is unbecoming. So Lord would prefer to strengthen the princes instead. I thought that was why we entered this alliance. To take the power out of the palace. Just because we might have similar goals for now does not mean that I have to trust you. I know what your people have been doing, so you best restrain yourself. Otherwise I might just turn around and aim my axe at you. Please calm yourselves, honorable friends. No need for unrest. We did not meet for a squabble, but to deliberate on tomorrow's banquet. Surely either or both of the younger princes will have prepared to take down Korko. We won't mind if the prince is humiliated, but he cannot lose his claim. More claims will only drag things out further, and we are the ones to benefit from additional time. However, our information on tomorrow is limited. We will have to adjust quickly. Let's see to it that this war for the throne continues. May it outlast the stars and the oceans.